daughter she has. Okay, let's call the, well, except I'm missing my colleague, Chair Nichols, so we'll give Mary a minute to get here.
Hey, Brian. Oops. I know. I was thinking. I was going to slide off the front.
Want to see if she, yeah.
You got raisins.
I did. Did you get some today?
Yeah. Good for you.
Oh, you must have been
For our
thrilled.
valley economy.
The election.
Yes.
Think you would have saved that money.
I got something ersatz.
Carl DeMaio.
President of the raisin capital of the world?
Terrible.
No?
Weasel, really, you know? He's so self-serving. His whole career
We live about 7 miles
on the
south
public
of
dollar. And all he talks about is small government.
Okay,
Within a 20-mile circumference.
thank you, Paul.
He got
95% of all
elected and he
raisins.
was all hemming and hawing about,
Really?
he was not openly gay. Now he likes to revise history and was not supportive of marriage
Drive
equality.
down.
It's like,
I guess through 99.
make
I
up your
don't
mind, guy.
recall
One way or
seeing
the other, yeah.
vineyards, or is vineyards the right word when it's grapes?
You know,
That's right.
he's a gay man.
The grapevines
And is now married, I believe. I mean, it's this. I'm talking about
further
this.
from the highways, huh?
Oh, probably close to. He was on the city council.
Well, most of those raisin vineyards
Quite a
are
while.
between.
And he has evolved.
Okay, we've, Richard's going to do his best Mary impersonation. Richard Corey will be, oh, here we go. I think we have our board members joining us. So let's get started. We've got a busy afternoon and looking forward to hearing from all of you. So with that, I'm going to ask our MPO presentation to come forward. I have Andy Chesley up first. Is that, no? Oh, it's another fellow. Okay, Hassan.
What's that?
Thank you, Chairwoman Inman,
There's only one. So
Commission members, board members, good afternoon to all of you. Now that you had your lunch, I hope you will give me 2 minutes and pay attention to what I'm going to tell you, and hopefully you'll push back on me if you think otherwise.
this way.
I'm here, you see the slides. I am the executive director of SANDAG as of yesterday. But I'm talking on behalf of SANDAG, SCAG, San Joaquin, MTC, and SECAG. Now, don't hold them responsible to anything I say that they don't agree with. I listened to the presentations this morning and listened to the discussion. And we act like surprised, why is the numbers going the other way? Because they are going the other way. VMT per capita is up. The economy is doing good, like Commissioner Dunn mentioned. Transit ridership in the nation, and mostly here, is declining. And we should not get surprised because for the last 60 years, we build our lives around driving. And SB 375 came and said to the MPOs, go ahead and develop sustainable community strategies that reduces per capita greenhouse gas emissions. I want to remind you, maybe you don't know this, maybe you do, that MPOs are not in charge of land use, that the majority of the funding that MPOs had spoken for by the voters of their regions. And so to tell an MPO says you have too much money, that's way over-exaggerated. I want to piggyback on something. Does that mean there is nothing we can do? Absolutely not. Well, there's a lot we could do. I am a firm believer that technology is taking over. When you hear the executives of GM and the executives of Uber and Lyft saying that we need to get into this ride-sharing program because in 10 years we're not going to be selling cars, you better believe this statement is worth billions and billions of dollars. So what do we do moving forward? I can tell you from Sandag's standpoint, to Commissioner Madaf's point, I promise you, if the board continue to employ me, you will have that app, Mr. Madaf, for every San Diegan, for everyone coming to San Diego, an app that tells you how to go around. We will deploy the Professor Sterling 3 revolutions. But that by itself is not enough. You have to combine that with the transportation system, and I underline transportation system. It is not transit against the highway. For the first time in our country, the first time there's more people who work at home and telecommute than riding transit. Think about this. There is more people today in our country that telecommute and work at home than riding transit. Now, you should not, I was telling Commissioner Kehoe earlier, you should not expect people to ride transit if a choice is a transit that takes 3 hours and a car that takes 35 minutes. The question is, how do you provide a transportation alternative, if not as good as the car, better than the car? And you combine that with the technologies, with the TNCs, with the 3 revolutions, and I promise you, in San Diego, we're going to work on that. We're going to make it so that if people take that alternative, whatever it is when we define it, that it is as convenient, if not more convenient than the car. Then we might impact land use, which we are not in charge of. But once you have the transportation system and you deploy technology, then land use can be impacted. But I also want you to know that you should not expect MPOs, all of them, to do magic. And in the next couple of years, we're going to submit a plan, put it in front of the Air Resources Board staff and say, we meet our per capita commissions based on our modeling and analysis and based on a plan that goes until 2050. Now you could say, well, look at the number, you're not doing it, we're going to reject your plan. That would be a big mistake. That would be a huge mistake because that would be going backward. Let us work together and deploy the resources that we have at our disposal to provide that transportation system that works together, that deploys technology, that makes it attractive for people to take choices. By the way, if you provide choices, then you should price the system. You cannot price the system now because you penalize people because there is no other alternative. But provide good alternatives and price it, nobody will blame you. At least I can speak for San Diego, that's what we're going to try to do. And I hope my board and the mayor of San Diego will allow us to do that, to provide the 21st century transportation system that deploys technology, that the 3 revolutions become part of it. So I ask you to think about, don't get surprised that the numbers are going the other way. And SB 375, yes, it didn't achieve the numbers, but it's allowing us to have this discussion. And we need to continue to having it. And we should not focus on the number yet. If we see regions not trying to build that system I'm talking about, then let's talk about it. Let's penalize them. But right now, I think there is no surprise of what's happening. I think we desperately need to deploy technology and provide transportation alternative that works, give people alternatives. We need to price the system right, and definitely we need to deploy the 3 revolutions as quickly as possible. So, picking on MPOs that represent 85% of the state population, 33 million. And I think one thing SB 375 did is allow us to work much closer together throughout the state. And I can tell you, since SB 375 passed, we've been discussing things that's going to result in actual real projects that get us closer to having a transportation system that provides choices for Californians, for all 40 million of them. So with that, I thank you, and I will be very happy to take any questions.
Hassan. Thanks, Hassan. Do we have any questions for Hassan? Yes, Dan?
Well, Hassan is one of my heroes because whatever success there has been for 375, Hassan gets a lot of that credit. But I want to ask, now that we're here, you have all this experience with the MPOs, what do you think we, CTC and CARB, can do to help you accomplish what you would like to accomplish?
Thank you. One is, you have, between the two of you, you have a lot of funding. And you have to allow MPOs some time to use that funding toward a real transportation system of the future. Deploy the technology. I think you should probably look at the criteria of how you give funding, because incremental change, funding, I mean, there is a lot of successful projects around the state, but they do not, when you have a state of 40 million people and 67,000 lane of highways, it is hard to see that incremental change at the regional level. But what you could do is make the funding available, actually change the way you look at our plans. Remember, our plans is gonna satisfy what the voters voted for. Our plan is gonna satisfy what the federal government wants from us, and whatever remaining is not enough. What's enough is for both the commission and ARB to make funding available to do the things I'm talking about. And short of that, we're going to be talking about the same things 50 years from now, and I hope not. I really do believe technology is going to take over, and it's shame on us if we don't deploy it, but we need the resources to do that. So that's one thing you could do. And when we submit our plans to you, don't look just at the numbers. Look at the direction that MPO is trying to go. Because disapproving a plan and going to doing, a fantasy plan is not doing any good. It will work the other way.
Okay, thank you, Hassan. We appreciate your comments. So with that, we're mixing up the schedule here for me, so Alex.
Good afternoon, commissioners and board members. My name is Alex Bockelman, and I'm the Deputy Executive Director for Policy with MTC and ABAG. And I'm going to advance the slide deck here. There were a few more slides actually about sort of all of our plans compiled together in terms of the investments. This one shows that, but I think we talked about that earlier, so I'm going to advance to the MTC ABAG specific slides.
Transportation-wise.
All right, so what I was going to do is give you a few highlights from our plan and then talk about some of the challenges that we are facing in our region in the Bay Area, and then talk about some of the actions we've been taking to try to be successful in delivering on SB 375, and then give some specific policy recommendations. I think each of the other MPOs are going to go through a similar framework, and then conclude with some of our sort of joint policy recommendations. So with that, in terms of Plan Bay Area, really the cornerstone of Plan Bay Area is focused growth. This strategy has been the cornerstone of the last two plans, and it's key to achieving our GHG reduction targets and accommodating the region's population growth. So specifically, what does that mean? It means that we are planning for 77% of the housing growth in priority development areas. These are areas that have been locally nominated to take on growth, and they are served by robust transit. Within that 77%, nearly half of the growth, or half altogether of the housing growth, is forecasted in the three large cities of Oakland, San Jose, and San Francisco. In terms of what we're already seeing is that the share of housing in PDAs as well as the multifamily housing has increased while development outside of the urban footprint has slowed in the Bay Area. We also are investing in new and modernized transit to serve these priority development areas. We've had several new BART extensions come online, a new rail system in Sonoma and Marin, as well as we are investing in new and modernized rail cars for BART and Muni. So another key element of our Plan Bay Area is really reinvesting in our system. In terms of our investment priorities, our primary commitment is fix it first, and that was a key emphasis in our first plan as well. 90% of our plan's forecasted revenues are dedicated towards operating, maintaining, and modernizing the region's transportation infrastructure. We also, another key element of our plan is really planning and investing for fewer auto trips. The plan invests almost 2/3 of future funding to investments in public transit, mostly to ensure that transit operators can sustain existing service levels through 2040. Only 10% of our funding is dedicated to widening or extending the region's street and highway network and extending or expanding transit lines. The combination of the region's focused growth and transportation investment strategy leads to a reduction in the region's per capita VMT and greenhouse gas emissions. Another very important element of our plan is supporting disadvantaged communities. Equity is a critical component, and the investment strategy's equity roadmap elements put regional discretionary dollars towards some of the highest priorities to advance equitable outcomes in the Bay Area. This includes fully funding transit operations, including all of the region's bus operators. That's key for ensuring mobility for Lifeline riders. In addition, the plan allocates billions of dollars towards frequency improvements on bus systems across the region, reducing the wait time for riders. Third, it puts $2 billion towards the Lifeline program and other county access initiatives, which are designed to specifically target the needs of low-income and minority residents. In the near term, we are rolling out a means-based fare program to make transit more accessible and affordable for low-income residents. So moving to the challenges, and there are many, and I think Chair Inman asked what keeps us awake at night, and I think in the Bay Area, it's housing affordability. We have a housing crisis in the Bay Area. And our plan projects that not to get better. Housing costs are expected to grow significantly, increasing the risk of displacement. Plan Bay Area 2040's worst performance was related to housing plus transportation affordability. While transportation dollars are benefiting low-income residents, it is housing that proves to be the critical factor in improving the affordability in the Bay Area. For affordability and affordable housing, the plan wasn't able to change the trajectory trend of ever-increasing rents and home prices that are creating serious pressures for lower-income families. We need to explore policies and strategies that can better address the housing costs component of this if we want to be an equitable, inclusive region going forward. Another one of the challenges that has been touched on a little bit today is transit ridership and emerging mobility. The Bay Area has a history of robust transit service and ridership, ranking third for per capita transit ridership among the 10 largest metro areas. Now, I think earlier the third was used also, but I think that was on one system, and we have 26 operators, so it's all combined. So anyways, I don't want to steal Phil Washington's thunder there. On a typical weekday, Bay Area residents boarded buses, trains, and ferries approximately 1.8 million times. While ridership has surpassed pre-recession levels on a per capita basis, transit use is still about 10% below the levels of the early 1990s. More concerning is that after several years of growth, we're seeing that our rail systems are starting to lose ridership. BART and Caltrain, which we're seeing year after year, significant growth. Also, emerging mobility is disrupting how we operate, fund, and plan. San Francisco's TNC and congestion report included the alarming finding that ride-hail services accounted for 47% of the increase in vehicle miles traveled between 2010 and 2016 in San Francisco. Other reports indicate that TNCs are affecting our travel decisions, particularly transit, walking, and biking. On the positive side of emerging mobility, our regional bike share system has seen a quadrupling of trips, with over 1 million trips this year. It also has a robust equity program with a $5 per year low-income pass, and over 23% of the members of the program are low-income users. As we look further into the future, autonomous vehicles could also present another series of risks and opportunities for our regions. Another challenge area is congestion. The region's economic boom has pushed congestion levels to record highs for the fourth consecutive year. Commute times continue to tick upwards in 2016, hitting a record high of over 32 minutes. And while the majority of Bay Area residents have reasonable commute times, 15% have extreme, or what we call super commutes, lasting more than 1 hour each way. And the last challenge I will mention, we haven't talked about as much today, but it is resilience. And I think it's very much on our minds, having what we have gone through, what we all went through in the state with the wildfires. But the region's growing population puts more people at risk from future sea level rise, wildfires, and earthquakes. With respect to the wildfires in the Bay Area in 2017, we had the North Bay fires, which destroyed 5% of the housing in the Bay Area's fifth largest city of Santa Rosa. On sea level rise, a major east-west connector of the Bay Area, State Route 37, is projected to be fully inundated at 36 inches of sea level rise, which could occur by 2050. But SR 37 has already experienced severe flooding. In early 2017, the entire corridor was closed for nearly a month due to flooding from the Novato Creek. So this type of flooding will become more frequent and severe as sea levels rise, and we really need to focus on resilience of our regions as well. So in terms of some of what we have been focused on to try to be successful in our region and some of the actions, one of the landmark programs we have over the last several years was to integrate transportation investments to housing outcomes, is what we call the One Bay Area Grant Program. Over the 10-year life of the program, we're investing $874 million to support priority development areas and affordable housing via supportive transportation investments in local streets and roads, streetscape enhancements, safe routes to school, also doing planning in these priority development areas to make sure that we have the good linkages between good transit as well as we're prepared to actually put more housing in these areas. And also a very small amount of direct housing investments. More recently, we adopted a housing incentive pool, which is really sort of a challenge to local jurisdictions, and that they will be rewarded. The 15 that produce or preserve the most housing will be rewarded with transportation dollars to use for transportation investments. Additionally, over the last 18 months, we have been deeply engaged in the CASA initiative, which brings leaders together from across the Bay Area to build an actionable political consensus around increasing housing production at all levels of affordability, and also preserving existing affordable housing and protecting vulnerable populations from housing instability and displacement. This has led to the development of the still being negotiated CASA Compact. The CASA Compact is a 15-year emergency policy package to confront the region's housing crisis head-on. It includes a series of policy reforms that will allow the Bay Area to build more housing at all income levels while protecting tenants in low-income communities. The compact also includes a series of revenue recommendations needed to preserve our existing housing stock, subsidize the construction of more affordable housing, and provide assistance to tenants that face eviction. So in terms of a few policy recommendations, just thinking about the Bay Area, there'll be some that sort of are collective for the whole state a little bit later, is that we think it's really important to partner, that the state and the regions partner on bold housing actions. CASA estimates that the funding gap to implement the compact is $2.5 billion a year. Not one time, but a year. CASA proposes to meet $1.5 billion of that with regional and local self-help measures, but the remainder would need to be funded through a partnership with additional state and federal sources. We also think it's really important to increase the reliable funding for regions so that they're able to make these connections between housing, transportation, and equity goals. To bring together all these elements, there needs to be funding sources that are certain and flexible. For MTC, the primary source that has allowed us to do innovative programs such as OBAG have been the federal formula funds that we get, the STP and CMAQ. The state funding sources have tended to be a little bit more prescriptive and not allow the certainty that we would need to partner with local jurisdictions toward delivery of the SCS. And I guess lastly, just in a lot of what we're talking about, that mobility is changing, it seems that we all need to work together to figure out how we can modernize funding program administration. As regions try to fund equity programs or try to partner with the private sector on new mobility options, a lot of our funding sources don't really lend themselves to these types of projects. They're really meant more towards traditional transportation construction projects. So I think that will also be important as we go forward. And that concludes my part of the presentation. I'd be glad to answer questions, or you can do them at the end after all the MPOs.
Thanks, Alex. I think we're going to ask you to stand by, and we're going to do all the MPO presentations because I think there'll be some integrated questions, hopefully. So thank you very much. We appreciate it, and we'll hold our questions for Alex. Okay, here's Sandy.
Thank you, chairs, commissioners, board members. I'm Andrew Chesley. I'm the executive director for the San Joaquin Council of Governments in Stockton, California. I wanted to say thank you. SB 375 was a process bill. It was meant to change the way we do business in each of our regional transportation planning agencies to integrate better transportation, land use, housing, health indicators, greenhouse gas emission reductions. And to that extent, it has changed the way we do business at metropolitan planning organizations throughout the state. To that extent, it has been a success. An example for this in terms of our goal setting regarding our sustainable community strategy in San Joaquin County, the need to meet future housing needs. And when we talk about housing in San Joaquin County, we talk about the jobs housing imbalance that occurs. We can talk about why it is that we can build houses but can't build as many jobs to fill those houses, that instead, for some reason or other, we house people and import them to other regions to work every day. Regional transit expansion has been a key aspect of what we've tried to do, doing this not just about expanding the number of trips, but also expanding the way we do it technologically. Strategic roadway improvements in the San Joaquin Valley. All 8 regional agencies have identified Highway 99 expansion as a priority for us, and we have been taking steps to make that happen. We still have a long way to go, but improving the operations, the safety, the movement between 5 of the 105 largest cities in the United States, 5 of the largest 20 cities in the state of California, seems to us to be an important priority. So strategic roadway improvements are on our list. Enhanced goods movement. In San Joaquin County, we've been doing goods movement since the gold rush days. And that has been a key aspect of our connection to the Bay Area. I mentioned to the California Transportation Commission in October that 5 years ago, Amazon had no employees in San Joaquin County. Today, they are our largest private employer, and within 12 months, they likely will be our largest employer straight out. The change between distribution and retail that mix has blurred over the years. And improved public health outcomes. In the San Joaquin Valley, you will find the 8 counties among the worst performers in terms of asthma, diabetes, heart disease. These are important factors now in our planning process, something that was not at the top of our list prior to SB 375. And we have done this change as well by reaching out to our public to participate even more in our process. As a matter of fact, Ms. Connect, who gave the presentation earlier, was helpful in terms of changing the way we do business of outreach, providing many grants to organizations to bring out people for our meetings and our issues. 400% increase in our public transit transit needs process. And on each of our scoring committees for ranking projects today, we have someone from a public health organization participating in that. Next slide, please. But we have some challenges. Bus ridership has been an important component of what we've tried to do to build that connection between our housing and transportation improvements. But as you can see, our operating cost continues to go up at a predictable rate, but our ridership has dropped. We are trying to turn that around by doing technologically different things. We have like an Uber type service that we have the San Joaquin Regional Transit District using in unincorporated parts of our county to try and build ridership up there and reduce our cost. Oh, thank you. But also at the same time, the ridership on our Altamont Corridor Express is up by 15% this year, and it's been going up about 5% each year. But recognize as well the difference in income. On the San Joaquin Regional Transit District, the median household income for a rider is $32,000. On the Altamont Corridor Express, it's over $100,000 for a household income. When we start making investments in passenger rail, we have to recognize the disparity from those investments in terms of whether it's an equitable or an inequitable distribution of our resources among our population. Income levels in the Bay Area are, as we all know, fairly high, $120,000 household income and median home value, $657,000. As a matter of fact, if you look, the most recent listing, average listing for houses in the Bay Area is over $1 million. In the San Joaquin Valley, the median household value is $200,000. In San Joaquin County, it's a little over $300,000. And our household income in San Joaquin County is a little bit over $75,000 associated with that. But the difference between us and the Bay Area is substantial and has an impact on the way we do our SB 375 planning process. Also, at the same time, unemployment in the San Joaquin Valley, in Stanislaus and San Joaquin County, we're about 25% above the state average. But you go farther south, and Tulare County is twice the state average in terms of unemployment. When you talk in the San Joaquin Valley about what's important to them, it's about economic development, it's about job growth, and it's difficult for folks to say to themselves that somehow reducing VMT is going to be a positive to improving economic development and economic opportunities in the San Joaquin Valley. When you look at the upper right-hand corner, super commuting in San Joaquin County is right in the center there. Every morning from San Joaquin and Stanislaus County, 84,000 people travel to the Bay Area for work opportunities. They do that because it works for them. Taking that longer trip is more important to them than necessarily worrying about being close to where they live. That kind of housing opportunities are just not available in the Bay Area for folks, so they come over into San Joaquin County and purchase a home at something like $250,000 to $400,000 less. It makes sense to them. And when you look at San Joaquin County, so you can understand some of the dynamics associated with our SB 375 planning. When you look at the shortest median commute distance, San Joaquin County has the shortest median commute distance in the nation among all urban areas. We also have the largest percentage of people who travel more than 90 minutes for a commute. So we have both ends of the spectrum in San Joaquin County, and we have to do our planning accordingly for that. Rural versus urban. In the San Joaquin Valley, when you make a decision about where you're going to invest resources, trying to make a decision about whether to invest in Woodlake or in Fresno in terms of what's the best return, in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, will almost always be Fresno. If it's a decision between investing in Thornton or investing in Stockton, it will almost always be Stockton where the investment will occur. But that has social inequities inherent in it. And that's something that in our SB 375 process, our board wrestles with all the time. Success stories, so bus transit. All-electric BRT were the first all-electric route bus rapid transit in the country in Stockton. And by 2025, all 5 of our bus rapid transit routes will be all-electric. Rail transit, expansion into Sacramento and Merced. Thank you very much to Secretary Annis and to Chairman Frazier and the state legislature. We have $900 million to make expansions of passenger rail service, which, as you can see from a distance perspective, makes a big difference in terms of our ability to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and VMT, but is drawing a lot of our resources into rail transit. As a matter of fact, when you look at rail transit versus highway capacity, there's almost no money in the next 10 years going into highway capacity in San Joaquin County, but there will be over $1 billion going into rail transit capacity increases. In the areas of public health, we've integrated public health metrics into our planning process. It's been a little challenging to do so, but it's essential to do so with the health indicators that we have in San Joaquin County and the rest of the San Joaquin Valley. Housing, assisting local groups in their efforts to secure funding. We've done a great job along these lines, but the need is so great, it's so fantastic, that even these small efforts are tough to measure against SB 375. Nonetheless, these are kinds of success stories that the SB 375 process was meant to create. So some of our policy recommendations, redevelopment is our largest missing tool. I think you'll find everybody agrees on that, and even the state legislature is picking up the issue here in this coming session. Mobility is evolving. Fund sources must become flexible enough to support this evolution around mobility. And mobility, when you go out and you talk to our constituents in the San Joaquin Valley, they tend to equate mobility with economic development, not with reductions in VMT. It is important when going out and meeting with our folks to recognize that demonstrating economic development, job growth, the ability to offset this jobs housing balance issue is important. And from that, maybe you can reduce VMT, but job growth tends to dominate the discussion. Accelerate the development and improvement of technologies, and that's definitely something we are trying to do in public transit. There'll be marginal differences associated with this, but we're trying new things in public transit, and I think you'll find that with each of the MPOs that address you today. And lastly, statewide pricing strategies. When it comes to pricing, it's we don't have the tools at the region. When you talk about trying to price parking in a downtown area in the San Joaquin Valley, where you already have a dearth of development and activity in the downtown area, pricing doesn't really make much of a difference. But pricing strategies at a statewide level can have a real impact upon the amount of VMT and greenhouse gas emissions. So we encourage both the California Air Resources Board and the California Transportation Commission to consider that in your discussions. Thank you very much for your for allowing me to present to you, and I'll turn it over now to the next speaker.
Thank you, Andy. So now, thank you, James.
Well, good afternoon, board members, commissioners. James Corliss, I'm the executive director of the Sacramento Area Council of Governments. It occurs to me, actually, as we take this look back at SB 375, I used to work down in the Bay Area. Actually, I used to work for MTC, and I left California for 10 years and came back. So it's a little bit like when you've left your house for a little while and you've seen your garden actually grow. I've seen the change in the last 10 years that you're all discussing today. And let me offer 3 just brief observations. While I think none of us, from the MPO perspective, think this is enough or we're completely achieving success here, let me tell you 3 things that have happened. Number 1 is we're being much more quantitative. While our models and looking out 20 years and whether it's 18 or 19% maybe is not what the travel models were built for, we are moving towards a more data-driven understanding of the biggest bang for buck on our transportation investments, and that's a really good thing. I think cross-border collaboration and actually understanding what's going on between our regions. You're going to hear me talk about mega-regional investments that go across our traditional boundaries of regional agencies, and that's why it's great to follow Andy in San Joaquin and MTC in the Bay Area, because economically we're linked. And then finally, I think social equity, understanding the divide between the transportation haves and have-nots, and this is a part of the conversation. While by no means have we solved it or done enough, but it is now infused into this debate here in California. So I do need to say those things in terms of what I think SB 375 has provided. So from a Sacramento perspective, we're 6 counties, 22 cities. I do remind you all too, I think you all know this, the MPOs and the COGs have the local governments on our boards. Every local government in the Sacramento region, 6 counties, sits on our board. The very people that make those land use and housing decisions are on our board. Let me give you a couple of highlights. Well, I think, and this may be sadly an exception rather than the rule, we have been able to use the CEQA streamlining that was promised in SB 375. You remember back in 2008, this was supposed to be, if you were compliant with the plan and you had development and housing you wanted to do, you got CEQA streamlining. I think I probably have about 17 PhDs who are trying to figure out exactly how to use CEQA streamlining. So it shouldn't have to be that hard, which is maybe why it's the exception. But we'd be glad to offer our the sort of lessons learned on that. But it's a big deal, and we think we can probably do more with that. I've actually been in front of the CTC before to talk about one of the programs we're proudest of, and that's Civic Lab. We know in our region, we're inland California, we don't have the resources and the funding, and we never will, to basically solve all of our problems. So we've got to be smarter. Civic Lab is a program to basically take an incubator approach to our cities and counties. The first year we ran it, we said, what if you didn't have a lot of money and you had to use technology and creative problem solving? How would you solve your transportation problems? And I'm gonna come back to one of the solutions for that. We've seen great things emerge from this Civic Lab program over 9 months, and our board has put $1 million into funding the pilot tests. And finally, fourth bullet down there, I will tell you, our general plans, our local governments have changed their zoning and their planning as a result of this. Maybe not enough, but things are changing. They are actually looking to us to ask us if things are SB 375 compliant. So those are some good things to celebrate, but we have challenges, and I think all of us, as you're hearing today, are absolutely willing to admit we have a big hill to climb. Whether we're trying to hit our greenhouse gas targets or achieve social equity or achieve economic prosperity in inland California. You know, I think it's been mentioned about the timing of SB 375 in terms of both the Great Recession, the loss of redevelopment. I cannot tell you how important and impactful that was in our region. We want to do, and we have an SES, a Sustainable Community Strategy, that is going big on infill development, not Manhattan-style infill development, 2-3 stories over retail, along all of our old aging retail corridors. But we can't get that to happen because we've got Bay Area labor costs and we don't have Bay Area home sales or rental costs. So we have a cost differential. While CEQA is a problem in our region for sure, we actually have a financial gap. We would love to write down that financial gap if we had flexible funds and resources to do it. And finally, and I'll come back to this too, I would just say there's a lot of state-level programs and criteria that are statewide that just don't work for smaller communities, for inland California, Central Valley. I'm going to give you some examples. Let me give you some successes, though, in terms of specific projects. I mentioned the mega region. Andy mentioned the ACE train and the service down from now San Joaquin County to Silicon Valley. Pretty soon, again, with the leadership of a lot of the people in this room, we're going to extend that up to Sacramento. That ACE service is going to be an economic lifeline that will come down through the Tri-Valley and Silicon Valley. We're going to be speeding up through TIRCIP grants, the Capital Corridor to connect us. And let me tell you why this is important. I was doing a presentation recently in, I think it was Roseville, and somebody says, that's great, so I can go shopping, in downtown Sacramento. That's great, I want you to go shopping. Here's the other benefit of this. When startup companies are looking to leave California, and we don't want them to leave, Carl, I understand that, but when they're thinking about the high cost of doing business in California, they can put part of their operation in inland central California and have part of their operation in Silicon Valley. I know this to be a fact. There are people now living in Sacramento who are going to work 2 days a week at a startup company in Silicon Valley and living in Sacramento and taking the train. So this is an economic competitiveness play, as well as just a simple steel wheels and steel rail. Third bullet down, electric shuttles. We are going big while we want to eventually maybe get light rail out to our airport. It's going to cost us a hell of a lot of money and take a really long time to build light rail to our airport. So we have just funded a new electric shuttle service that will be nonstop from downtown to the airport, from UC Davis to downtown to the UC Davis Med Center in downtown Sacramento. We are doing that because our board actually committed flexible funds to what we call our Green Region program. We're funding electric buses, electric shuttles, and car share in low-income communities around our region. And our board, when they adopted this program, said, will this help us achieve our SB 375 targets? It's front and center in their minds. And finally, last bullet, one of the projects of many we're proud of that came out of our Civic Lab program, we have summer construction internships for low-income youth to get them to job sites. They were showing up late. So the first experience of the employer is, I'm taking a chance on a kid and he or she is showing up late to work. And the kid gets there late. Why? Because either they're taking 3 buses or relying on very unreliable transportation from a relative. So we are going to pioneer a very simple microtransit service that will actually pick up kids and get them to actual job sites on time, so that is not the first experience they or their employers have. That came out of our Civic Lab program. The funding that it takes to fund something like that, it might be a little more costly than a fixed route transit service, but it's going to be more effective. We don't have enough of that kind of flexible funding to underwrite some of those projects. So policy recommendations. I just want to end on a couple of these notes before I turn it over. I know you all know, and we've mentioned redevelopment. I can't tell you how innovative financing is. We've lost those tools. The tools we do have, the few we have, like EIFDs, are not working well enough in our region. We need more flexible infrastructure funds to support infill. I was talking to one of our smaller cities to the north of Sacramento, and we were talking about infill development and the SCS and meeting SB 375, and the city manager said, we've actually lowered some of our fees, our impact fees, but I'm not getting enough of the interest in the development community to come in because our impact fees are so high because we're using impact fees to pay for everything. So I said, well, what would it take? And he said, we got to go to zero. If I can actually waive impact fees, I think I can get interest from the development community. We can come in and build the things that we want in the SCS, but I've got to have some sort of backfill to replace at least a portion of those impact fees. We, by the way, Bay Area mentioned CASA and their housing initiative. It's almost a challenge program, a pilot program that we're readying to take to the state and the legislature next year to help meet our greenhouse gas target is very much inspired by that story on impact fees and a flexible fund that we desperately want to fund the infrastructure that the impact fees would normally fund. Support for next generation transit in suburbs and small towns. I mentioned how tough it is just to simply run a fixed route bus service in small towns and suburban areas. Where we can do it, we should, but as an earlier speaker said, we need high-frequency transit. I believe high-frequency bus transit can and should work in our region, but funding and running a really once-an-hour bus to very low-density rural areas is not going to cut it. And that's, again, when we measure the success of things like how much we're funding transit, what we really should be measuring is how much are we spending on actually moving people to opportunity? That should be the measure of success. So we need help, and we need help across the state to understand what are innovative solutions in lower density, more rural ag areas, suburban areas, where another new form of flexible transit can work. Pricing, we've talked a lot about that. This is going to be a major part of how we want to get to our target. And finally, I just want to end on this note. as I've mentioned a lot, the Central Valley, Inland California, smaller towns, it's very hard for us to compete for cap and trade funds. So we have a project, it's a wonderful project. It's revitalizing a public housing development just north of downtown Sacramento. We want a light rail stop. We want the funding to build a light rail stop so that we have transit, but we can't qualify for the cap and trades money because we don't have transit access, right? So it's a chicken and egg issue on some of the criteria. So I would just put in front of you, I think, as difficult as this is, something that is scaled to the size of communities across California, we think would work much better. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, James. So stay close because we're going to do all questions together. So Kim?
Good afternoon, Kim Kawada. I'm Chief Deputy Executive Director of Sandag. Thanks for having us here. I think you're going to hear a lot of similarities between all our presentations. I want to draw your attention to some documents that are on the table, the stuff that to my right, the largest stack. That's our last regional plan and regional and SCS. That nearly foot-long thing includes the EIR, the technical appendices, the plan itself. That costs nearly $10 million. So are we having success? We're spending a lot of money, and I do think we're having some success. I do think our plans are good. We've worked for decades with our 18 cities and counties, and to work with them to look at focusing growth, at where you put smart growth, at where you put transportation, at try to innovate. So I think in some respects they're good. I think some of it is we are having difficulties actually implementing the plans that are in place. The housing that's included and what's being planned for, when you're actually getting down to the actual building and doing, you're already doing something a little bit less. So let's say you're zoned for 20 to 30 units per acre. By the time things go through the process and get public input and there's all the stakeholders, many times what people are doing is building less housing where we need to. And we are having these tensions where we're actually getting the economics of development is pushing housing or making it more cost-effective for people to build on the fringes and build in our unincorporated areas. So our plans are good. We just have to be able to implement that and kind of affect the way we do that. So I wanted to kind of put that into perspective. In terms of highlights, we do a lot of things that are similar between all our 4 agencies. Like MTC, we have a smart growth incentive program that encourages and incentivizes our local jurisdictions to plan for smart growth, plan for transit, plan for higher density housing. Our board just approved about nearly $30 million of funds in the last year for this. Sandag and the San Diego region has been a leader in habitat conservation. I'll talk a little bit about that in relation to how we integrate that with our major capital improvement projects. The new things that we're doing that, frankly, we are experimenting, we are getting new partners, we are trying to figure things out, things to support 3 revolutions, for example. We're working on a mobility hub strategy. We've worked on something like that to look at how can we take our transit infrastructure that we have, some of which is good. We have some good light rail systems that are in place that serve our highest density populations. They are the highest ridership systems, and we haven't seen that drop off in transit ridership on our high quality rail systems that we have in some of our bus systems. So how can we take that and really use that as a trunk, as kind of the central nervous system that then we can connect communities? So we've done things like regional mobility hub planning. I have cities that actually do want to implement that, to put scooter share, to put ride share, to put the amenities for shopping, your dry cleaning, whatever, so you can take advantage of the investments you already have today and make those connections that may or may not include typical buses and typical shuttles and stuff. We may need to look at different ways of doing that. We ran a bill last year on neighborhood electric vehicles because we have cities that see that they can't get people from where their transit stations are out into their communities. And so they want to look at deploying neighborhood electric vehicles to take that and move people around. We've talked a lot about, and a lot of the discussion talks about highways versus transit. Frankly, that's the wrong discussion. Really, people will go and people will use modes if it's convenient for them and if it makes sense and if it's priced right, and we'll talk about pricing later. One of the things that we've been doing as an agency since 1988, when our first sales tax measure was approved, was investing in what's now called active transportation, or ATP. We used to call it walkable communities back then, and it was only about $1 million a year. Since then, we've doubled that. We've doubled the percentage from our sales tax measure. We're putting monies in. The board has approved a regional bicycle program, which includes bike lanes, services, education, counting to see how many people are actually using that. But we're only 5 years into that. So I think some of the transformational changes you're going to see with active transportation really is going to depend on this infrastructure being built out the same way we've built out our transit and freeway networks. And we know right now you're going to have a lot of people in the audience. We have relationships with more than a dozen community-based organizations that we've put under contract to work with us in our planning, in our implementation. Beyond those, we have other partners that we're working with. Many of you, I think, are going to hear from them through the audience that we're working with as well, because how we address the have and have-nots and where those geographic areas we need to better serve is also very important to us. So our challenges, a lot of it you've heard before. For us, we have about 3.3 million people right now, and we are expected to grow about another million, just another million. So I got 3/4 of the folks and the jobs that are already here. So anything that we do to reduce greenhouse gas emissions or reduce VMT or to improve equity is going to really need to focus on the folks that are here today. We're going to need to look at strategies that address those folks, not just the new growth. In terms of technology and new mobility, that's something we are struggling with, but where I think that regions can play a role that is different from the state agency and the locals. I think we are that bridge, because we are where we can, I think things can be tested. We've been very successful early on. Back in the 90s, I was a project manager for our first congestion pricing pilot program. So that has formed the basis of our hot lane networks in not just the San Diego region, but all throughout the state. That started as a pilot project because people thought we were crazy doing that. So those are the kinds of things that we need to think about now. What are these new things? What are the new mobility services that we need to pilot? I think people are open to it, but I don't know if we want to jump, straight into the deep end right away. And I think regions are the places that we can push our local agencies. We can, bridge that gap between the state and the federal government and localities, and pilot things that then we can scale up. Pricing is going to be important. We're right in the midst of doing our next SES, and so we just started some early sort of concepts, running our models, where we looked at 3 different things. One, we looked at what if we took all our money and we just invested it in the highway system? Can we reduce congestion? What does that do? Can that reduce GHG? What does that do to VMT? We did the same thing, taking that same amount of money. What if we invested it all in transit? So 2 capital things, transit versus highway. And then we did another one that looked at ramping up a lot of policies. Well, the 2 capital investments both got us below the targets that ARB has set for us for 2035. So our targets are in the 19% range. We got to maybe 15 or 16%. Well, we turned up the policies, and when I talk about policies, it's things like TDM, demand management, it's better signal coordination, but it's pricing. It's pricing parking, it's tolling, it's pricing VMT. We got in the 20s in terms of GHG reduction. So it can be done. That scenario showed that we could reduce GHG, we can reduce VMT, but guess where it failed? It failed in equity, because the folks that are least able to pay higher fees are lower income folks. And so that's not the right solution either. But that's definitely something that we've shown that, through modeling and our exercise, we can move it in all the right directions, but at a cost. And so that's not the right answer. But we do need to think about, so how do we take those models and how do we apply it? Right now in the San Diego region, and like many metropolitan regions, about 3/4 of our folks drive alone for their commute trip. I have an employer that actually is reverse. 3/4 of their people take transit and take biking and carpool. And that employer is Sandag. So basically, in downtown San Diego, we have about 300 employees. We offer reduced transit passes. We offer TDM programs. We subsidize, biking and walking. We have showers in our buildings. And actually, 3/4 of our employees take something other than driving alone to work. So we've really flipped that script. But why does it work? It works because we're in downtown San Diego, and we have good transit. It works because we have a walkable system, because we have restaurants, shopping, you can take your dry cleaning. It works because we provide subsidies. So it's not that there's not models out there that work. It's how do you take that and scale it up? We have our iCommute program that reaches out on a voluntary basis to employers that are looking to do the right thing or looking to reduce their parking needs. So as I mentioned, 3/4 of the folks in San Diego for their drive alone trip drive alone for their commute trip. For the employers that we work with, we baseline their things. They start off like that, but on average, we've reduced their drive-alone commute by about 10%. And that, we know that because we survey them every 18 months, and we work with them on a really hand-holding basis. So we have that in place. That could be scaled up working with our jurisdiction. So there's models that are out there. And housing affordability, I'm not going to talk a whole lot. I mean, it's really something that I think everyone knows in the room. In terms of successes, I have two commissioners here, Commissioner Madaffer and Commissioner Kehoe, and I wanted to talk about one of our what we feel is a really great success in the North Coast Corridor. This is a $6 billion vision for one of our lifeline corridors. It's one of two north-south corridors. I have about 60% of the population in the San Diego region that live in the coastal area. And here, thank you to CTC, thank you to Chairman Frazier, thank you to Secretary Annis. CTC has invested funds through the Solutions for Congested Corridors and other funding to improve this. And what this does is it's looking at transportation really as a holistic system. So it's not just a freeway widening, it's not just a double tracking, it's not just building bike, it's everything together. And what we're looking at is how do people move? People move in this corridor. I have the second highest intercity rail system in this corridor, the Los Angeles corridor, besides the Northeast corridor. I have, truck traffic, freight traffic that's using this corridor that connects our border and our largest, California's largest trading partners with Mexico up to north, ports north and destinations north. So what we're building here is basically building new lanes that can be priced and incentivized for carpools and transit and van pools. We're double tracking a coastal rail corridor to ultimately provide more Amtrak service, provide more coaster service, provide more freight service. We're spending more than $100 million in one of the lagoons to re-energize that lagoon. Transportation has been a barrier to the environment over the years, and so we are restoring that lagoon, spending more than $100 million. The kicker is, we knew we needed to dredge and clean the lagoons, and so we're pumping that sand that we dredged, it's high-quality sand, back on the beaches to improve recreation. Actually, and it helps with adaptation in terms of sea level rise and climate adaptation because we have the wider beaches. So it's sort of a win-win-win. One of the things that Caltrans has done, we needed to do retaining walls on some of this. We looked at breaking that retaining wall up so it wasn't like, some 50-foot high retaining wall and actually stepping it. And when they looked at that, they said, oh, we actually could basically provide that space now for bicycling. So we added a new bike lane along the side of the freeway for the folks, as I joke, the spandex riders that like to use it because of different ways. We're just looking at how we can encourage transportation. And we're doing bike lanes. We're making sure our transportation corridors aren't barriers to people needing to walk and bike and commute in these local cities and communities. So our policies are in terms of what we're asking for. Obviously, I think one of the things I'm personally looking for is we're spending a lot of time on modeling and numbers, and we know we need to do that. We know we need to be data-driven, but we do need to sit down. The one thing that SB 375 has allowed us to do, working with our partners, is we're doing a lot of best practices. MTC, I think, is doing great things in terms of housing. Other folks are doing things with the urban-rural divide. So I do think that we need to spend a little less time and really sit down and going, what are the things that we know work, and then how can we fund that? Pricing is going to be important, whether it's a VMT fee that we ultimately transform to, whether we get as regions a little more flexibility and trying to insert pricing and do it in such a way that's still safe and can be piloted before we can scale up. I think we need to work on that. Smart city initiatives. One of the biggest things that people want growth and they want housing, but one of the biggest things that they're frustrated with is traffic congestion. And so one of our ideas with this plan is cities want to do smart signals. They want to provide the infrastructure that's the future infrastructure for AVs and connected vehicles. How can we take that and make it a smart region approach so we can help the cities look at what they need to invest in. We can help procure things that they need to do in terms of communications and signals and whatnot. So that's an idea we have. And we really need to look at, one of the areas that we've been trying to push is EVs. We have a commitment we made with our last plan to stand up a regional charging infrastructure program. We know we need to increase charging stations tenfold. We know we need to basically coordinate that. When I started asking our team to look into that, I'm still confused because I got an ABC of agencies. I have ARB working, on the Electrify America proposal with the Volkswagen settlement. I got CEC that's helped funded some things. I got the PUC that's working with SDG&E. We're doing all these kind of charging things. We're sort of circling around as independent planets or moons, and we haven't really sat down and go, okay, we know we need more charging stations. How do we plan for that? How do we fund it? And how do we bring all those sources together? So I think that's where I talk about the regions being that bridge and being, we can plan, we know what the cities are going to grow, we can help fund, we have great GIS capacities, we have great data, and so those are some of the things that we'd really like to work on together in partnership with both agencies. Thank you. Darren's up.
Thank you, Kim.
Good afternoon. Darren Chitsey. I'm the Interim Executive Director at the Southern California Association of Governments. Nice to meet all of you that I don't know, and good to see some familiar faces. Before I get going, I just want to thank your staffs. Our organizations get the opportunity, probably more than any other organizations, to work very closely with both of your staffs on a regular basis. Certainly, they're always professional, and today, putting together was no exception. So really appreciate Richard and Susan. Really, the 6 months we've been talking about getting to today, and how exciting it is to finally have this conversation. We work in this world, as you've seen, over the last hour, every day. Certainly, air quality goals are very much tied to our transportation goals and have been in the 30-plus years since the Clean Air Act. So it's exciting to be here to talk specifically about what's going on and really get to dig in a little bit as to what the successes on SB 375 have been, and certainly, as have been identified, some of those opportunities to continue it forward. I'm the closer, so I'm going to focus a little bit on some SCAG work and then also tie together some of the comments you've heard from our MPO colleagues. One of the things that we jumped over a little bit at the beginning is how much has changed since 2008 and SB 375 passed. We actually had a slide that was earlier that listed off 7 things, and I want you to think about how many of them are true today that were true in 2007 that were assumptions when we started down this path. 1, the economy would continue to grow. 2, the state's population would continue to grow in similar ways. 3, more housing would be built. 4, redevelopment would play a vital role in success. 5, we had significant questions about the impact of technology, but we never envisioned TNCs. 6, we would find a way to capture choice transit riders. And 7, gas prices would continue to climb. And I say that as a start of our conversation because these are just some examples of things that we really thought would probably be true over the last decade. Let's add on a little bit more about the conversation about technology. Certainly at that time, the same year, coincidentally, maybe not, that the iPhone was introduced, right? And here we go, in our world of transportation has completely been turned over. And we're only a decade into that. And when we talk about long-range planning and when we talk about the work that we do, it usually takes decades to make any progress. So I do think it's important that we focus on those things because certainly some of those were uncertainties and unknowns, and certainly some of those took some time for us to take a step back and say, what does this really mean and how do we do that? And I think you're going to see and have heard in each one of our presentations, we're all doing that. We're all doing that in a very new way. But what that means is sometimes those successes aren't going to come to fruition as fast as we want them to be. And sometimes not every one of them is going to work. And so we have to balance that as we move through. In the SCAG region, again, in 2008, we were in a time just entering into recession that really over the course of about 24 months took away 1 million jobs. And think about that, 1 million jobs from a region that's about half the state. We started at that time really looking more closely at what we as an organization could do with the economy. We worked more closely with certainly our business partners in the private sector. And the key question that always came back was we have to invest in our transportation system. We have to think about how do we get people to work, how do we support our economy. And that stayed true as we worked on our initial sustainable community strategy. And I think that today, if you looked at one success as something that nobody quite saw before SB 375 was passed, it was that sense of collaboration. Pam O'Connor, who's a past president of SCAG, was president of SCAG when we adopted our first SES. Where's Pam at? There she is. She thought that she did the impossible, and that is she brought together a region of nearly 18 million people, 191 cities, 6 counties, all those different transportation commissions in varied environmental and business interests, and brought them together through a sustainable community strategy, and its first one that was voted on and passed unanimously. President Wapner is our current SCAG president, is also here. He was the chair of the Transportation Commission our Transportation Committee at that time, and now as our SCAG president. Certainly as we gear up to do it again, the challenges are going to be just as great. But on top of the partnerships that were formed at that time, we've seen a dramatic amount of change in our transportation system. In our last plan, certainly rail transit system expansion has been key to that. The slide that you see in the top right, those big blue lines, those red lines, those show all in our plan of the rail lines that will be in Southern California in 2045. I can tell you if I showed you that slide from 1990, there wouldn't be one line in it. So when you think about change in a region and how conversations like this can help bring that change forward, it certainly can happen, but again, that's almost a 50-year period. We have to think about how long it takes to move some of these things forward. Not saying that that's okay, but I think some perspective on that is very, very important. But some specific facts about how much our transit system has grown, and you heard Phil talk about it earlier today. We're going to add over 200 miles in our urban and commuter rail systems, and I think more importantly about 160 new stations. So when we think about TOD, when we think about changing communities, the opportunities of the decades that are coming before us to really double our rail stations and how we can plan and think more strategically around them, that's a really great opportunity. And again, one of those things I think is going to take some time for us to really see how it makes it happen. Our plan certainly focused on population employment growth in high-quality transit areas. Traditionally, in Southern California, it was kind of a 30% to 70 split between single-family housing and multifamily housing. We started to see that shift in our plans, and certainly as we're starting to see some of those implemented, the density is certainly increasing, not exactly where we thought it might be in terms of close to transit, but certainly we are seeing density increase throughout the region. On active transportation, the initial plan, we had about $2 billion. That tripled to $6 billion. And we're really starting to see through programs like our Go Human program, those of you on the CTC that can stay Friday night, we're having a special Go Human exhibit where we're lighting up a walkway, connecting Metrolink station to the Festival of Lights. And again, these are really innovative ideas to show how first last mile solutions can really bring together some exciting change. And I think most importantly, one of the things that we're able to do over this last decade is start to incentivize our member jurisdictions to think differently about their land use and their planning. We certainly have done that through about 260 local demonstration projects throughout Southern California, $33 million. We certainly thank the Secretary and Chair Frazier for including more money for that in SB1. There's a little thing we can do to start to connect on those planning grants to really incentivize some of those incentives moving forward. The challenges, you've heard about all my colleagues talk about these earlier today. Certainly transit use is declining, housing prices are increasing, and certainly not keeping up with our median income. Just as a little note, median income in Southern California is really only about $65,000, maybe $68,000 a year. In the Bay Area, it's over $103,000. So I think it was noted. I remember Mitchell earlier, the differences within the regions, and meaning that solutions are going to be different within each one of the regions, and that's just one little example. Here's a shameless plug for those of you that are interested in learning more and aren't CTC commissioners that are going to be busy on Thursday. We are having our annual economic summit just down the street on Thursday, and certainly we'll be updating all sorts of regional economic information, as well as looking at some of the future of transportation and how we think Southern California is poised to really grow our economy around some of that transportation and technology. New technology, has been touched on before, certainly is going to be a big part of anything we do. What that looks like certainly is going to be a big question mark, but I think one of the things that we've learned, and I'll give kind of a specific example of it, is about 5 years ago when we're doing our 2016 plan, Hyperloop, which is headquartered right down the street from here, came and met with us, and we're talking about what we do and what's a long-range plan and what does it mean and why it's important. And they said, well, that's great. We want to be in it. we're going to be up and going in 2 years. We got to get in this plan. I said, well, here's what you need to do. And I lay out a process for them about how they would need to be part of our plan. And they, certainly as people that are on the cutting edge of technology, that are pushing the entrepreneurial spirit, just looked at me with blank stares and then went on along their way. So I think one of the key things we learned and we're going to have to focus on as we're updating our next plan is how do we make sure transportation technology projects have a different way to access the capital and the system and the regulations that are part of our plans, because simply saying go down this path and wait a decade, wait 15 years is not going to move us as fast as we need. So some sort of new framework on that outside of just trying to understand what technology really means. And certainly we talked about climate. We have a lot of work going on in our new plan to really address not just sea level rise. Certainly we have wildfires that have been very impactful in our region, but also things that like earthquakes that we know it's inevitable it's going to happen in this region. How do we make sure Southern California is going to be able to show the strength and resiliency needed over the next decades to come? But we have had some success, and I did want to focus on that a little bit. We've talked a lot about the challenges of transit, and I can tell you, a couple specific examples where we have seen transit increase. Certainly, we've seen the Metro Expo line be expanded to the ocean. We've seen the Gold Line be expanded. We've seen all sorts of new investments happen along those transit lines. So I think there are some positive signs for transit in there, particularly on our rail systems as we continue to connect and grow that system, becomes more useful. Again, and I talked about the 160 new stations, lots of opportunity, lots of successes there. On bus transit, it's true, we've done a lot of work, certainly in Southern California, understanding why transit has declined. A big piece of that certainly has been, to some degree, the economic growth that's happened in the region over the last decade as people have greater access to cars because they have greater resources, because interest rates have been low. All those things have combined to allow some users to make a choice that made more sense for them. How do we get those riders back? It might not be the only question. It's how do we get new riders? How do we make it more useful? And there's I think some positive news on that too. Again, we're the first time in really 50 years our industry's had to rethink itself. And every one of those, the individuals that spoke before me, every one of our member agencies is really focused on that. We see in San Bernardino doing a lot of different things in that county. Orange County certainly has still had their transit ridership decline, but they focus some resources on one of their lines that had lost the most, readdressed resources from other parts of the county, and they've actually been able, with those changing investments, to start seeing uptick in certainly some of those lines that they've focused on the most. So it's focusing all of us to work harder, to think harder, but I think a lot of us we are up to the challenge, and you're starting to see some of these changes really bring up some new opportunities as we move forward. A couple policy recommendations from SCAG, and I'm going to highlight a few from all of the regions that spoke before me. Certainly, and we talked about this, and everybody has, greater sustainable funding tools to support RTPS implementation. I think I've met with most all of you at some point individually and talked about the challenges that the SCAG region has had on cap and trade funding. Certainly very excited by that opportunity when it initially came out, and certainly thank you, Secretary Annis. We always appreciate that the portions that come out of transit do have that sense of regional equity. Other programs have not had that same regional equity, particularly affordable housing, sustainable communities portion. We still are in that 20% range of where we have 50% of the population and 2/3 of the disadvantaged communities. So without that, without redevelopment agencies, it has been a challenge because we have not been able to have some of those catalyst type development type projects in our region. But we are working towards that, and certainly got new money to do a couple of those in the years to come. Certainly looking for state leadership's role in new transportation technologies and VMT reductions when we talk about pricing. Certainly the idea of congestion pricing and really being able to focus and study that more clearly is something we're very interested in, that looking at some specific areas and perhaps some pilot programs that we'd like to certainly partner with the state on seeing if there's benefits to doing that. And most importantly, CEQA streamlining. It's been talked about it from everybody before. Glad to hear the success that James has had with the SB 375 CEQA streamlining. We have not seen one of those projects happen in our region. And so not only on the transportation, but on the housing side, ensuring that we're able to cut costs, cut time, and have some sort of relief on CEQA is certainly going to help move this forward. When we talk statewide from our colleagues representing the agencies above, it's a pretty common list of suggestions. All of us, I think, could easily put these on the table. And the one that I would just add is time. Again, I think that for 30-plus year transportation plans, that our plans, they're not regulatory documents, they are plans, they are first step in thinking what we can and what we possibly can do in regions, but making sure that there is a little bit more time than has been before we judge, are they going to be successful, can they be successful or not. But I think there's some realities that certainly Professor Sterling put on the table that we're going to need to address head on. And certainly redevelopment, technology, really finding this way to capture innovation in ways that we haven't been able to do before, looking how, if we are going to explore pricing strategies, how do we make sure equity is at the center of that, because certainly that's very, very critical, especially in a region like ours that have a lower median income and high commute patterns oftentimes for those lower paying jobs. And how do we make sure funding is consistent? The federal level certainly is going to be a big ask, but we're going to have to all get together as we look towards what the future of the Highway Trust Fund looks like, but also on the state side, that certainly SB1 is a huge, huge support mechanism for the work that we do, but the reality is there still are unmet needs all over the state that we're going to have to figure out how to be innovative to do. And bold housing actions. I mean, we can't do any of this if there aren't new houses that are being built, that we're finding a way to support workforce, to support low income, because the reality is, transportation and housing will always be integrally linked, and until we're able to solve one, we're never going to be able to make any impact on the other. So with that, thanks, and happy for me and my colleagues to answer any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Hey, Darren, thank you so much, and thanks for working closely with our two staffs. And is that any coincidence then that we're meeting on your birthday?
I thought it was a birthday present to me, so thank you. Glad to be here.
It is, so we'll all join in wishing Darren a very happy birthday. So. You thought we didn't notice that, huh? So if I can ask your other colleagues to come forward and then open it up to questions by my colleagues up here from the board, the commission. Yes, Commissioner Alvarado.
Kim, this is a question for you. On this $10 million study, that's for your whole area?
Yeah.
And it has the general plans for all the cities. It has, pretty much everything in your area. You spent $10 million on that thing.
Yeah, that includes the 18 cities in the county. Their land use plans has integrated with our regional transportation plans going out to the year 2050.
And I imagine there was an EIR did on on that thing right
Yes.
there.
So
And this is one of the barriers that we have. And I'm sure this is not unique to Sandak. They just spent $10 million on a regional EIR. Yet in every single city, in every single project in every single city can be challenged on an EIR and take years to get through the planning process. And, we're here as a transportation commission, we're here as an air board, but over and over again, housing came up as an issue.
Mm-hmm.
We need to recognize these regional EIRs. We need to recognize these regional planning. The cities have done their planning, they've done their housing element. This document has taken all that into consideration. We need to recognize that document. This should be a design review issue. We shouldn't have to litigate EIRs and zoning over and over and over again. It should be, does this project fit into the community? Does it enhance, whether it's downtown, urban, or rural? Does it enhance the quality of life? Does it provide the things that we're looking for? That's $10 million, really, that only addressed the greenhouse gas issue. It only addressed and I don't, forgive me, I just drew a blank, SB 375, that only addressed SB 375. Now, here we go again with every single project in every single town going to be challenged on EIR. And you do one project here on Block A, and it has an EIR, and when you go to Block B, there's another one. And it was already taken care of in this thing. Fact is, taken care of better because that's a regional look at things rather than a project by project look at things. So I think, we need to look at, and I kind of brought it up before, we need to look at a couple things. We need to look at the regional EIRs, and I think we need to look at zoning. I think that zoning is exclusionary. I think, when you talk about an R1, it should be 20 units and less. And if you fit in, you don't need a parking variance, then you just go through with it. And again, it becomes a design review issue rather than a zoning and an EIR issue. Thank you, Kim.
Thank you. Other comments, questions? We've got a lot of talent standing in front of us. Yes.
I just want to thank you all for giving us an opportunity to kind of, in a very limited way, walk in your shoes and have greater empathy for what you go through on this planning process. And I know you didn't have time to go into depth of how much public input you have into these plans. But I know from the limited visibility I've had to the different plans, they have a lot of public input, and they're very, very expensive and very, very time consuming. So thank you for sharing with us and, again, allowing us to walk in your shoes and get to know what you go through to get these done.
Yes, Jim.
So more than one of you talked about the need for additional, flexibility of funding, but also just more money. And I'm trying to figure out exactly where that would come from, or if you've got any ideas, because the voters have just supported a major, and as you all know, very significant funding increase that was desperately needed for our transportation infrastructure. They've upheld that legislation through refusing to vote for the repeal. So that was a good news. The Air Resources Board has a very robust cap and trade program that raises a lot of money, and if you haven't spent it all, you know where you're going to spend it. So I'm just kind of wondering, where we would go from here, because frankly, we've got a pretty significant chunk of funding that we need to be pretty responsible for. I'm not sure that I can think of where else we would go.
Vice Chair, absolutely. But I think what we have to do is to put into context that the plans that we do are 25, 30-year plans. And I think both of those funding sources that you cited, whether it's increasing the gas tax, are declining revenue sources. So as we look to see what's going to happen towards the future, and we certainly know, fuel consumption is declining and will continue to decline, absolutely SB1 is put us in a great spot, and I don't think it's any short term that there's anything else. But as we look to the last decade of our plans, certainly there's going to need to be new funding there. Same with the cap and trade funding. If it is successful, certainly we're hoping that emissions are to decline and those revenues are going to come. They could go up, but they could certainly decline over those times. So I don't know that it's a look to in a place. I think the other thing I would add is on the federal government side, I know our plan is about 13% federally funded, about 70% local, about 20 plus percent state funded. So the federal government is going to certainly, the Highway Trust Fund is going to be insolvent within the next 18 months. So they're going to have to address some of their needs there. So I think all of them just revolve around not just about more money, but it's about how do we make sure these funds are stable through the future so we can plan accordingly around them.
I think that obviously Commissioner Medaffer has been working on a very important program here for the last several years. And I think those of us in the transportation community know that over time, alternative funding mechanism is going to have to be in place because, we're pushing, if all of these goals that have to do with reducing greenhouse gas are achieved, then we really aren't going to have much in the way of petroleum-based fuels to tax, and the cap and trade program will at some point exhaust itself. And so then we're looking at, perhaps a vehicle miles traveled program, which apparently nobody likes around here as far as vehicle miles traveled. So I'm just kind of wondering what our thought process is. We don't obviously, I don't think it's necessary today to start aggressively pushing toward that because we have just gone through a major upheaval to try to just solidify a very important funding source. But we all know in another 10, 15 years, that funding source, those funding sources are going to be much different than they are today. And so we need to be able to kind of start laying the groundwork for that.
I'll just add one more thing. I mentioned sort of modernizing how we administer some of the programs, and I think that's an opportunity where we can talk. I understand growing the pot is big right now, and holding on to SB1 was a huge victory for everyone. But as one example, I know there's been a long-standing discussion about whether the MPOs could have a greater role in the Affordable Housing Sustainable Communities Strategy funding, which goes through the SGC. Right now, we have a fairly limited role in that. And I shouldn't be the one saying this because the Bay Area has done very well in this program. So, but anyways, that said, I think that was an area where we thought this could, it would make sense for the MPOs to have a larger role in delivering the SCS. Another one I would mention, MTC really partners very well with the Air District in our region, but we have come up when we've talked about, well, how could we accelerate, conversion of zero-emission fleet for the buses? How can we do more charging stations? Sometimes we come up against rules that, well, if you want TFCA funds, you need to go through, an annual process, and we need to look at every single GHG for each little piece of the project or something like that. And sometimes that's very hard when you're trying to put together a very ambitious, like, let's go ahead and accelerate this, let's do big moves, let's partner, let's put some of our money in, let's put some of your money in. So I guess I would say that maybe it's not always about growing the pie, but could we think more strategically how we administer the programs and how we can partner. And sometimes the really complicated application processes that we require, I don't know that they're always getting us the best outcomes.
Mr. Vice Chair, if I could, just to build on Alex's point, the point I made at the end of my presentation about we have the public housing redevelopment just north of Sacramento. We can't apply or qualify because we don't have a transit station, but we want the money to build the transit station. That would actually be a lot better if we could get some access to those AHSC funds and get them at a regional level and then set our criteria based region by region. That's just one example. It's not new funding, but it is a way for us to, I think, leverage more of the state funds and be mindful of the geographic differences. That's number one. Number two, I know I stand here with a lot of MPOs who are in pretty robust self-help county regions, but there's a lot of inland California and there's a lot of the Central Valley who still struggles to meet a 2/3 vote threshold. I know that's been tried a lot. For instance, I've got my Placer County colleagues here who, if they can't get a lower vote threshold, would love a smaller geography to be able to draw. Allow us to be creative in the parts of our regions or even the subparts of our counties or subparts of our regions. The voters that are willing to say yes to something like a sales tax increase, we would love that flexibility. And just a final point on that, coming back from Congress last week where I testified before the U.S. Senate on the next transportation bill, I am convinced, and I don't have to convince you probably, there's no more 80%, 90% federal money, right? Those days are in the past. What there is probably are loans, are incentive match programs. The Trump administration actually floated this idea for localities that are actually self-help. This is the future. We need to do as much self-help as we can all across the state.
If I could add just a point here, and you know this better than almost anybody, Commissioner Arp, when it comes to half-cent sales tax, I've talked to our board about it. What polls well in our region is roadway maintenance, interchange projects, some local roadway projects that can be improved in some manner. When we talk about some of the things that we've talked about here before you in terms of greenhouse gas emission reductions, trying to lower VMT numbers, they don't poll nearly as well. You can catch particular groups for it. We've talked about a 0.5-cent sales tax on top of our existing 0.5-cent sales tax, but it's not something that's going to win the day, at least not at a 2/3 level, for the kinds of things we've talked about today.
And I'll close with just a thought on that. I'm glad you brought that up because I think it's a point that we have to be very, very cognizant of here, so that we're talking in realities. So many of the goals that we are striving to figure out how to get our hands around to reach are important goals. I don't think it's instructive for us to use or rely on one tool to try to do everything. And to think that, for instance, reducing vehicle miles traveled is the linchpin of achieving greenhouse gas reduction. It is a tool, but it's like trying to use a hammer to put a screw in. You know, sometimes it's just not the right tool necessarily for certain things. So I think we need to be very cognizant of the fact that we still live in a democracy. If you ask the average citizen what cap and trade is, you're going to get a blank look. They're going to have no idea what you're talking about, and they will definitely not know that cap and trade may have added 40 to 50 cents to the price of gasoline that they're paying. They all seem to kind of get the fact that gas taxes were increasing here because of recent legislation, but they didn't really know exactly how that worked either. And so I think, you know, when they were educated about where our infrastructure was and what was, what was going to happen if we didn't have that funding, they kind of got that message, and so we were able to preserve a very important chunk of funding right now. But when you get right down to it, most people are very, very pragmatic about getting from point A to B and what they're dealing with from day to day. And it's going to take a while, I think, for us to really help enlarge the vision of all that there is, that there are benefits that come with some of the things that we're talking about today that are going to take some time and some coordination. I don't have an answer for that. I don't know where, and I don't think meetings like this necessarily are going to solve all of those problems, but we do need to be able to figure out how we're going to get there. But we, at the end of the day, we do still live in a democracy. We still have to answer to voters who pay our taxes and pay the bills for all of this. And I think that I live in a community that has done a pretty good job, thanks to developers, Commissioner Gilmetti, who have built a lot of bike paths and bike lanes and done a lot of parks, a lot of things that have made that community more enjoyable to use, to walk around in, to ride your bike in, and so forth. And we live there because of that. But if I have to go to Home Depot to get a sheet of plywood, I'm definitely not going to be doing it on my bicycle. I'm going to be getting in my pickup and sticking it in the back of my pickup. So we have to remember that there's goods movement issues. There's a lot of other issues. We had a huge, devastating fire in the north. There is now they're looking at what happened in Paradise. They had just redone downtown Main Street, made it more, calming, where they got rid of lanes and they made it so that there were, it was more pedestrian friendly. But, unfortunately, that didn't help evacuate a lot of people. And so there are a lot of people that died. I don't know if you can point your finger specifically to that, but I think that didn't help. And so we have to figure out, we really have to be open-minded about the consequences of where we go with our decisions on transportation and how we use our funds. There are very important goals to be achieved in terms of just being able to move an ever-increasing population in this state also. And so we're going to have to figure all of that out. Thank you.
Thank you. Mary and I are trying to figure out what else we can do. This is great. Other questions? Yes, Chair Fraser. Oh, and
And then him.
And then we'll go to Gilmetti. Thank you.
So, thank you very much, Madam Chair. So just kind of a statement, when we look at unfunded mandates, they're aspirational goals. If we don't give the dollars to accomplish the mandate, then it can't be generally accomplished. We can't expect, with people's general funds being taxed to the constraints of the economy now, it's unfortunate. When you look at the California state budget, say it's $136 billion a year, we only have about $3 billion of discretionary funds that we can utilize going forward. There's 120 mouths in the legislature, that has to feed those mouths, okay? Plain and simple. So when you look at the self-help counties who are going out and stepping forward and being a part of a solution to reduce GHG, to reduce vehicle miles traveled, because of the efficiencies that they're gaining with their investment, they can take their money and do local projects only if they choose to do so. And the people that they represent would. So not recognizing the self-help counties is absolutely criminal. They are a big factor in this going forward of the success of everybody's efforts in California. The other process is that we look at Mr. Annis's budget over at the agency. Catastrophes have devastated his budget in the last few years for moving forward and going and working through the Big Sur, the mudslides down south. So we have unanticipated costs that have gone completely off the charts. But yet we talk about doing other things that are either unattainable because of funds or pointing fingers at people because we can. The other thing is the tools have been removed from some of the MPOs was affordable housing. 25% of cap and trade was taken away and utilized somewhere else that its intended purpose when it was conceived. We can continue to talk about this, but unless there's money and you have a resource to go to and tap, all of this is for naught. We don't have housing because developers aren't building it because of legislation that was enacted many years ago called SB 800, and they will not build multifamily homes because of risk for latent and patent defects for 10 years. It's an automatic lawsuit if you build multifamily homes. And Mr. Gilmetti can confirm that. So there's so many traps that are laid in place, CEQA, unless there's a priority made by this body and all the other bodies in California, nothing's going to be accomplished. We're just going to continue to talk about it. So I wish that we would make a concerted effort to talk about, if it could be funded, then this would be a possibility to accomplish. That's all I got to say.
Thank you, Chair Frazier. Commissioner Gilmetti?
He's fun to sit next to. I just like to turn the attention back to, I think, one of the critical issues with regard to congestion and air quality, et cetera, and that's where we put housing. We've created a lot of jobs, for example, in our area in the Silicon Valley. And we have some good transit systems. We have a Caltrain that starts in the city of Gilroy every morning and goes into the heart of Silicon Valley, where more of the jobs are being created with Apple, Google, Facebook, et cetera. And for that matter, continues all the way into San Francisco, where we have Twitter, the president's favorite toy, as well as Salesforce, et cetera. But we have poor land use policies. And I think until we address the land use policies of trying to put housing closer to where we're creating the jobs, we're never going to solve this air quality and congestion problem that's facing the state. To that extent, I think we need to work with either the League of California Cities if they're willing to work with us, but there has to be some sort of check and balance in terms of where we're going to put housing. Everyone says there's a housing crisis, but God forbid we put it in your backyard. No one wants it there, but they know there's a housing crisis and we have to take care of it. In the state of Massachusetts, and this was developed with affordable housing, they created legislation called 40B, and I'm probably going to bastardize the summary of it, but in essence it said if the cities don't put the affordable housing in their municipality where it should be, the developer has the right to go to a state appeal board. And the state appeal board has the right to overrule the city and basically usurp their local control. No city wants to lose their local control, and to the best of my knowledge, in the state of Massachusetts, I don't think that's had to take place because the locals now feel that, well, if we don't do it, the state's going to do it. So there has to be some sort of check and balance so that we start putting housing where it needs to be. And in the Bay Area, we have Caltrain, which I alluded to. We have BART that goes out to the Livermore Valley. And we have a Smart Train that we just paid a bunch of money for from Santa Rosa all the way down basically to the Larkspur Ferry, which then connects to San Francisco. The housing policies in those areas are flawed. And I'm not going to point to which cities are flawed, but they have strong growth control, et cetera, and you can't get anything done. So where do these people go? They go to where Andy was talking about. 80 some odd thousand people move out to San Joaquin County. And that's a tragedy. All these people spending all this time on the road, less time with their family, Little League games, et cetera, et cetera. Why? Because housing's affordable out there, because we didn't build it where we should be building it. So until we address that and make the cities be more responsible, we're never going to solve, Dan, the congestion problem that you alluded to. Anyway, thank you.
Plus, have they ever consulted developers?
Thank you. I do think that with all the discussion today, the development community has been missing as part of this discussion, and as Commissioner Gometti pointed out, and he has so graciously helped us understand the drive till you qualify. And when I hear Andy talking about he's given a label now, it's called the super commute. That's kind of like my senior ticket I bought in the rail in Scotland was the super adult, and it didn't feel great. I'm just saying. No, but I think that it just points out really the collective body that it's going to need, and the resources, to Chairman Frazier's point, to really get it done. So I know Secretary Annis wanted to say something, and Commissioner Madaffer, anybody else. We're going to probably try to wrap this out because we've got a lot of public that wants to comment too. So Secretary Annis.
Sure. Well, I enjoyed the presentation. I was sort of writing down some commonalities of all the regions that spoke, and sort of reflecting too on as Dan wanders off some of his comments on transit. And one of the things that as I look to the crowd here, I was thinking of various cap and trade grants and SB1 grants that are going to transit in your regions, and I think I heard from everyone a robust investment in transit. And in the SB 150 report, I think the Bay Area was singled out a bit as having maybe bent that curve and having trends in the direction of growing transit ridership, and many other places seeing transit declines. But trying to reflect on why that might be, I do think that the Bay Area has gotten about a 20-year head start on investing in quality transit with the BART system. It sounded like, Darren, you said some of the rail and the SCAG region started in the early 90s. But again, I know through the grant programs and your plans, we'll see more and more. As Phil Washington said, the LA Metro projects, you start to see the frequency of the BART system with Metro. Metrolink, you're going to start to see the frequency of the Caltrain system that's very successful in the Bay Area. I know, where you have these quality transit corridors, of course, a lot of emphasis on adding housing and other people attracting locations along those quality transit stops. And as Commissioner Gometti said, adding more where you have a quality stop without a lot around it. But I just wanted to see if anyone wanted to comment on that. Is that the investments in transit, I think, are certainly in the pipeline. I don't know, Alex, if you want to observe on the Bay Area why maybe you're an outlier in terms of not seeing that transit decline. And, is it overly optimistic to see that with some of these investments on the way that we will start to see more of the regions or big urban areas start to more mirror the success of the Bay Area?
In terms of the Bay Area, I think if you kind of peel back the onion a little bit, we've seen a lot of growth on Caltrain and BART, but we have seen similar trends in terms of losses on our bus network. So I think it's, when you look at things in aggregate, it can mask some of what's going on beneath it. So, and I do think that the success of BART and Caltrain have to do with the land use decisions, some of them being good. We need a lot more housing around them. But there is quite a bit of housing, and it is a fast and reliable, they are fast and reliable systems. So I think what we're seeing, though, is that, we're seeing a lot of trends away from taking the bus service, which I think maybe isn't as reliable. And we are sort of following SCAG and having UCLA look at the transit trends in our region, because as I mentioned, even more recently, we are seeing some declines within, or at least softening, if not declines, for BART and Caltrain. And I think we want to understand that better. I think with BART, I think they have gotten to the point where they were getting to the point that it was uncomfortable to ride the system. And that really has to do with, we can't just extend the system. We need to keep up with state of good repair and modernize and make sure that, so we've got a whole rail fleet that we're trying to, replace. We're trying to add more. We've talked to you about adding more for Muni also for the LRVs. So at a certain point, your systems can get too crowded and then people will abandon them again. So I think, it's a tricky equation, but we definitely support the cap and trade funds, and we think those investments are really important, but we can't just always look at extending. We also have to balance that, especially in places in the Bay Area, that we have to modernize, and we need to have more frequent service where we can. And we also need to get the local jurisdictions to put more housing near the stops of the high-frequency transit.
Commissioner Medaffer?
Thank you. I'm really encouraged by a lot of what I've heard today, and I agree. It's great to have the mind trust of the MPOs here. And I think the big encouragement for me is because we're all talking and we're all listening, and realizing a commonality and sharing ideas. I've been taking a lot of notes, like Secretary Annis, and a few snippets. Clearly having an app that includes all forms of transportation should be a goal for us going into the future. My tech geek buddy here next to me will talk more about that, and those kind of ideas, but really to where you can ride the coaster, the Metro, Metrolink, Amtrak, Lyft, Uber, scooters, carpools, bridge tolls, and yes, even the miles I drive. Those should all be coming out of one centralized account. We should be setting that as a policy. We should be encouraging industry and technology to move in that. Carl Gordino can tell you right now, he's got plenty of companies in the Silicon Valley that can work on that thing, or they already are doing it. Government's just not stepping up to let them do it. We need to fix that. Ms. Dunn and I were talking today at lunch. We don't care if it says Amtrak, Coaster, Metrolink. We want to get from A to B, and I want to use one ticket and one form to get there. And you know what, right now, we're letting the public down. If we're not making it easier for them to use the system, and she has to spend 20 minutes, as I watched today, just to buy a damn ticket to get home, then we've got a problem. Now, maybe people that do it every day, I get it, maybe they know how to do it. But the reality, that's an issue. Growth is going to happen. VMT is going to keep going up. Let's face it. I understand my friends at CARB want to push that the other way, and I think we can, and I think it's going to have to be through incentives. But listening to MPO comments today, I conclude a lot of this centers on two words: land use. Land use. MPOs don't do land use. Cities do. So that's an issue. 375 policies haven't really worked. I looked to my friend Jim Gilmetti, and when I first met him, before I was president of the League of Cities, he was BIA. Darrell Steinberg, I think, was in between the Assembly and the Senate. He grabbed onto our idea and turned it into 375, but we never really did everything that we talked about doing. Cities didn't cooperate, and we didn't get to where we wanted to be. But clearly, as I heard also today, regions are the catalyst between the state and local governments. We need to empower regions a little bit more in some of this stuff. I'll share with you, back in my days on the Sandag board, cities in my area were not doing their RENA production like we wanted to. How did we change that? We used our local sales tax dollars to incentivize good performance. If they did more RENA housing, we gave them more transportation money for local projects. It got down to one word: dollars. Housing keeps coming up. Commissioner Alvarado was spot on. If you got that EIR right there, that ought to be the master EIR. We shouldn't have to be farting around with all these other documents that end up slowing down projects and making things cost more money. Lastly, the loss of redevelopment, that has been a big problem. And I think Senator Wiener today, I just read, introduced SB 50 is kind of bringing back the bill that will actually perhaps help incentivize housing along transportation corridors. To Professor Sperling, I think he really has got an idea where he can bring forward a technology approach. The CTC has embraced technology big time, which I'm very proud to be part of that. Pricing is important, as I told James Corliss, but it's got to be done right. It can't become a disincentive to where it doesn't work, or it's a social justice issue to the people that have to drive the furthest because the jobs aren't where the housing is, and that's a concern. So I do like the idea, and I'm certainly going to encourage my colleagues on the CTC to, assume a more leadership role in formulating policy recommendations to really find a balanced approach on how we can achieve California's transportation goals and objectives and blend that on issues to reduce GHG as part of our transportation plan. So again, I want to just thank all of the ARB folks. Again, this idea of us getting together is not only brilliant, but I hope we do it more often. Thank you.
Great. Okay, with that, I'm going to, James, one quick one.
Really quick, I just want to acknowledge our colleagues, the other MPOs. There's 18 MPOs in California. There's a bunch of RTPAs. This, you all know this is the CTC. But I appreciate our ability to come here and give you a little bit of a truncated presentation, just the 5 of us. But there's a lot of us here that really are working to try to implement transportation air quality, GHG reduction. So that's all.
Thank you, and I think we might hear from some of them, I'm hoping. So anyway, thanks. Great presentation. You all have given us a lot to chew on. Most of us were taking copious notes here, and I think you've also answered my question of Phil Washington this morning, what's keeping you up at night, by some of the challenges you put here. And I think also the success stories. So we'll take this and work with this. Good material for all of us. So with that, I want to go to the public comment. I want to once again thank everybody. It's great to have such a big audience. And you all have been here a long time today, and I do appreciate you sticking with us. We're going to go through these. I think I have 30-something. 40-something. Okay, I'm up in my 40s now. So please keep your comments succinct. And if you feel like you haven't had enough time to say what you want to say, you can always send us something in writing, or we're happy to get your insight and intel in any way we can. So with that, I think we'll try to keep them coming in waves if we can to maximize our use of time. So with that, I'm going to start with Ted Smalley, followed by Aaron Hakimi, John Gamboa. We'll do those to start.
Thank you. I'm Ted Smaller, Tulare County Association of Governments. Thank you for letting me speak briefly. I just want to echo and thank the comments from Commissioner Van Conyenberg, and Andy Chesley gave a number of perspectives from the Valley, and especially Assemblyman Frazier. I just want to note, when you come from an area like where we are, economic development is critical. I think it was noted, people don't care about achieving all these things if they don't even have a job. And so we have to keep that in perspective as we do our efforts. I want to also note that in our area, we've done a number of different pilot programs. I want to thank Dr. Sperling. A number of years ago when Valley came up, he challenged us, and I totally agree. It's sometimes one size doesn't fit all, and throwing transit money at certain areas is just a waste of money. And so, but he didn't just complain. He helped us partner with UC Davis. We have a number of pilot programs going. And so that's also spurred in our county. We're now meeting with our number 2 employer about looking at what do we do, not just traditional transit. So I just want to encourage that we need more flexibility, especially with some of these transit funds. Thank you.
Stan. Okay, Aaron?
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and Commissioners. I will be very brief. I agree with your comments, Chairman Nichols, wholeheartedly. Assemblyman Frazier, I was the lone person who was clapping after your earlier comments. Thanks for the backup. Dr. Sperling, we've talked, and you know my views. I agree with you 100%, and so does the federal government, that safety, congestion, and maintaining what we have should be absolutely our highest priority, and that is in federal law. I will be very brief. We should not continue as a state to blindly invest in areas that do not perform. We must collectively invest our limited and precious resources in areas that we know will produce results. We have over 20 years in the Central Valley of knowledge about how to reduce criteria pollutants, and certain measures that certain areas where we're going down, we know will not make a difference. So please, let's all get together and invest in the areas that will move the needle. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. Okay, John Gamboa, followed by Jennifer Hernandez, followed by Rosa Park.
Doesn't the Bible say something about cleaning up your own house first? I think you probably believe in some of that. They cherry pick their quotes.
This is really interesting to me today. While everybody's talking about a housing crisis, to the constituencies of the organization that I represent, it's not a housing crisis. It's an economic and social justice and civil rights issue on it. I represent the 200. It's an organization that was started by some of the most revered and older civil rights leaders in our country. One was George Dean, founder of California Urban Leagues; Herman Gallegos, founder of the National Council of La Raza; Bruce Kwan, who was a major leader of the Asian community and an investigator to the Watergate investigation that led to Nixon's resignation; the Honorable Cruz Reynoso, the first Latino in the Supreme Court on it. These men and others, 22 of us, got together, and some of us came out of retirement to address the wealth issue in California. An issue that right now that is increasing, it's large and increasing. We quickly came to the conclusion that the reason that this wealth issue is increasing is because home ownership is decreasing in our state. In this country, we created the greatest middle class the world has ever seen because we invested in home ownership from 1930 to 1970. But we left communities of color out, families of color. 98% of all the subsidies that came out of those programs went to white families. That left our community so far behind. The homeownership has been the avenue of wealth creation in this country since the beginning on it. And we were deprived of it. The effect of that it left us not only behind in wealth, it left us behind in all of the quality measurements that wealth provides. That's health, education, name it. We have been left behind. 1970, we started closing that gap on it. 2018, by 2018, that gap has increased again. Because of the so-called Great Recession, our community, African Americans and Latinos, lost in 3 years, 30 years of wealth gained from 1970 on. That redlining was a government-supported issue on it. And we're going through the same thing again today. The redlining that is being initiated by the scoping plan of CARB. That's a new form of redlining. Raising the cost of housing and putting it further and further away from our community is denying our community access to wealth. Not only that, it's not only affecting our communities, it's affecting our communities to support. We're going to have 4 million more seniors very shortly reaching retirement. That burden of support is going to fall on our communities, and our communities less able to support it because we are not investing in the minority communities, the millennials, and students. These three populations are not being able to buy their home because of the actions that CARB and the scoping plan is taking. I started thinking, why? Why, as an organization of good people, creating a plan that is so cruel to our community on it? Reminded me, well, many of you are, well, you look old as I am. You remember the play, what was it called? I can't remember, I'm too old now, but there was a song in there and says, why can people be so cruel? Or how can people be so cruel on it? And I was thinking of that, why? And then when I started looking at the personnel of CARB, out of the 1,600 employees in there, I found that in top management, there was only one Latino, zero blacks in it. I think that is part of the reason that our community is not heard in this issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I ask everybody, I love hearing from everybody, but we do have a little time issue, or our transit-oriented CTC that needs to get to Riverside is going to be challenged. But anyway, delighted everybody's here.
Thank you
Jennifer
very much,
Hernandez.
Chairwomen and members. I have the privilege, Jennifer Hernandez, of representing the 200. We sent in a comment letter, I think a worthwhile comment letter for you to read, please, yesterday by the deadline, which was put into your, quote, junk mail, which is unfortunate. You've got a copy plus the attachments. I just happened to bring them for you. I cannot believe in 2018 that the 200 had to file a civil rights lawsuit against the California Air Resources Board. Because who do you think is hurt by a VMT reduction mandate? Folks living in Santa Monica and working there, or folks priced out? And what is the color, and what is the age, and what is the wealth of the people priced out? I want to bring to your attention a couple quick things about the California Air Resources Board and urge this combined board, which has real responsibility on the CTC side, to make transportation work, not just deal with GHG. I want you to know a couple numbers. So under SB 32, a California family leaving counts as a global reduction of greenhouse gas. Even when they move to Texas, where their greenhouse gas per capita goes up by 3. That's a metric that CARB has chosen to adopt. It's a metric their senior person, Lauren Sanchez, agrees is flawed. Another metric, they don't count forest fires at all. We met our target, yippee-yi-yay. We blew our target so badly and killed people in the process. What are we doing, and why are we doing it? The only place you'll find how much greenhouse gas reduction CARB is counting on for its VMT reduction mandate is this study by UC Berkeley, which says it's less than 1% of what California is trying to reduce. And California is less than 1% of the globe. CARB has always wanted a VMT reduction mandate from the legislature. They tried and failed in 375, the legislature said no. They tried and failed in 743, the legislature said no. They tried and failed in 150. The legislature has said no. The only time the legislature has spoken on VMT was to ask the question, a reasonable question, GHG per VMT. As we electrify our fleet, we get cleaner. We don't have to punish the working poor amongst us. We don't have to punish the people who drive the longest, who, by the way, are construction workers. I don't know why CARB believes that it has legal authority to mandate reductions in VMT, but I urge you to put a stop to this study and please take a look at a civil rights lawsuit in 2018. Why are we having to do this? Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Okay, Rosa Park, Marjorie Kern, and Daryl Clark, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Inman, and Commissioners, and Madam Chair Nichols and board members. I am Rosa de Leon Park. I'm the Executive Director of the Stanislaus Council of Governments, one of the 18 MPOs, with a population of over 550 residents living in our county. But I would like to take this opportunity to mention some of the Stanislaus region's advancements that we've done in support of our SES. First, we are working very closely currently with our San Joaquin Regional Rail Commission and our local jurisdictions to get infrastructure in place that will support Altamont Corridor Express expansion all the way to Stanislaus and Merced counties. We are championing this effort, and we understand this is an investment on our future and that support the goals of your Senate Bill 375. We also have a program called MOVE in our Stanislaus region, and it's a nonprofit organization that is designated as our Consolidated Transportation Services Agency that is dedicated to connecting seniors, veterans, and individuals with disabilities with transportation options that access for their medical appointments, groceries, and it's a vital component of their transportation services mixed with our Stanislaus County that offers other specialized services. We are also working, you heard my colleague Ted Smalley talked about a partnership that we have with the UC Davis Institute of Transportation Studies and other of our Valley MPOs. It's a pilot program called Valley Flex, the goals of expanding access to residents in our rural disadvantaged communities to help reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. Since 2011, in our region, we have decreased our transportation investments from 87% in roadways to 57%. That has shifted our investment to increased percentage of dollars to transit, increasing our investment from 11% we used to invest in transit to 35%. So that concludes my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Is Margie's not here?
No,
Looks
she had to
like
take the train back to Santa Barbara, so I'm here to speak on her behalf. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Commissioners, members of the board, and Assemblyman Frazier. Sarkis Kachek with the Santa Barbara County Association of Governments. We are one of the 18 MPOs, and we're also a self-help county. We're also a member of the Central Coast Coalition, so thank you to the Commission for having your town hall in Gonzales, Monterey County. In Santa Barbara County, our highest transportation priority, our highest priority in our RTP is the Santa Barbara US 101 multimodal corridor. How SBCAG is looking at addressing congestion and improving the environment and air quality is by implementing a suite of improvements between Ventura and Santa Barbara County, which will include an HOV lane, peak hour rail service, interregional transit service, and including improvements on the California Coastal Trail. So for us, we definitely take this personally. Our outreach process is very robust with our RTP as well as our other plans. So that's what I think one thing you've heard a lot today from our other peers is that the public outreach process is important and it is happening. So with that, we just wanted to support the efforts of the Resources Board as well as the Commission. We look forward to partnering with all of you to help improve not just mobility and air quality in our region, but statewide. So with that, thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarkis. Okay, we have Daryl Clark up next. I'm going to ask Tony Bourne and David Grubb to queue up.
Okay, thank you. I'm Daryl Clark. Good afternoon. I lead the Sierra Club's VMT-focused work under our National Clean Transportation for All campaign, and I'm here representing Sierra Club California's Transportation and Sustainable Communities Committee. And I'm local. I rode the train from Pasadena to get here. Much of the rest of the time, my wife and I share a Chevy Bolt EV. So both aspects of what we're trying to do here to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Echoing others today, I want to focus on, number one, the acute housing shortage we have in California, particularly here in Los Angeles, thinking about the West Side, so many jobs, so little housing, therefore very long commutes. And noting, yes, the Sierra Club supports good, smart growth, affordable infill housing, and noted from well-documented statistics up to 2/3 reduction in VMT per capita living in that kind of mixed-use, dense, convenient community as opposed to the typical auto-oriented suburbia that we've typically built in California. 2/3 reduction by doing the right kind of infill, not to mention giving a lot of people the opportunity for housing closer to where they live, which I would hope some of the earlier speakers would find a welcome thought. Second, we really need to address the concept of incentives. The most recent report touched on it on page 76. The scoping plan from last year, Appendix C, were kind of a beginning, but it all seems to be rather gingerly about
providing positive incentives for people who can carpool, who can take transit, but perhaps they need the right incentive to kind of tip them over to do that rather than drive alone. And finally, thinking about urgency, there was talk about a mobility action plan. Can we do this quickly, like a 90-day draft, like a final adopted at your next joint meeting in June, so we can move quickly? We do have a 12-year window to 2030, and we need to decide what we're going to do and do it sooner than later. So thank you for hearing me, and good luck moving forward.
Good afternoon, Tony Bourne, Executive Director, Fresno Council of Governments. I'm real pleased here to be in front of you this afternoon to talk about our Fresno COG 2018 RTP. We're very proud of it. We're very pleased with it, as reflected by the unanimous support of our policy board. You say, Tony, why did they unanimously support it? I'll tell you why. It meets all of our greenhouse gas reduction targets as identified by the ARB. It meets our transportation conformity requirements. It introduces public health into the planning mix, first time in our history. It reflects a significant increase in farmland conservation, 58% less farmland consumed based on these sustainable plans. There are twice as many active transportation projects, 522 compared to the 2014 plan. We had a very proactive public outreach campaign that had a lot of support. We provide different transportation and housing choices within the plan. Beyond the plan itself, we're also doing a lot of other things in our region having to do with facilitating the transportation, land use, air quality connection. We have our measures here are half the sales tax. We have a TOD program where we provide money for planning and infrastructure to help facilitate TOD projects. We have a multi-jurisdictional housing element where we have 15 of our member agencies working together to put together a housing element that provides economies of scale that meets our needs. So we're doing a lot of good things. But in the end, all of these things, what our RTP reflects for us is an ambitious and achievable vision for the Fresno County region that is both realistic and sustainable, and allows the regions to grow at its own pace as directed by our member agencies, our cities. This is the way they choose to grow, and so I think that's why they have unanimous support for it. We're excited about what we're doing, but we also know that there's some challenges out there. One of the challenges is just sort of the geographic reality of land use in our area. Basically, the Fresno-Clovis metropolitan area is 120 some odd square miles, 635,000 people within that area, served by a half-mile grid system. Now, back in '86, when I first joined COG, we built freeways to provide connectivity to all these suburban communities and provide connectivities to our rural cities. It was a great thing. Now, fast forward 30 years, and that same land use pattern becomes an impediment because it's very difficult to get choice transit riders, which the majority of our riders, over 90%, are choice riders. So they're not going to use transit unless it becomes more efficient. Well, this distance that's involved with this horizontal land use patterns just is an impediment that's very difficult to overcome. I do want to point out again the issue of rural transit, the right tool. I think fixed route public transit is not the right tool. We're finding that out over and over again. So again, we need to look for new tools. We need to look for flexibility in terms of using shared mobility services in concert with the fixed route. We need to talk about ADA requirements on our rural routes. They drive the cost sky high. Fare box recovery, we need to look at that. It may not be appropriate. We've heard redevelopment. Again, that's something we've got to bring down the cost of developing in the inner city. But most importantly, I think if you're really, really serious about this, then you're going to have to engage the cities directly because in the end, they have land use authority. As regions, we can go to them and present a vision and encourage them and cajole them and, point out the value and the benefits of developing in a sustainable way. But in the end, it's their decision to make. So when I start to see the League of Cities and CSAC engage in this process in a really meaningful way, then I will begin to believe that we are really serious about that. But until we get serious about that, we are just kind of the middlemen in this process. But we're going to continue to do what we're doing and look forward to working with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Okay, David Grubb, and then in my queue line, I'd like to have Will Barrett, Nancy Pfeffer, and Ana Rosa Riosa.
Good afternoon.
And
David Grubb, Transportation Chair of the Sierra Club San Diego, speaking today for the San Diego Quality of Life Coalition, a diverse collection of more than 24 environmental and labor organizations working together to enhance the quality of life in our region and collaborating with our MPO SANDAG. We support the recommendations in the SB 150 report, including the Mobility Action Plan, and we recommend a strong focus on equity and mobility justice, a diverse stakeholder participation, and full accountability in the planning process. Thank you.
Thank you. Will?
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Will Barrett with the American Lung Association. So generally speaking, the Lung Association looks at SB 375 as critical to public health, a critical tool in our toolbox for improving public health in our local communities. It was wonderful to see so many COGs referencing their work on improving public health and equity in their planning processes. To your question about what keeps me up, that would be that we don't take the SB 150 report seriously enough, and that we delay action to take things seriously. As my Hanukkah gift to everybody here today, I'll be as brief as I can. Dr. Sperling said we need to acknowledge the report. I agree with that wholeheartedly. We also need to act now on solutions. A few recommendations that we involved in are included in a joint letter with Climate Plan and some of our partners. We do think that beginning the multi-agency dialogue as soon as possible is a key. That alignment of funding with effective greenhouse gas reduction projects locally is critically important, that we should be creating accountable actions for the state agencies that will be partnering in that dialogue. Setting a short timeline for actions, the previous speakers mentioned that as well. We have an urgent situation here. This report lays it out in stark terms, and that if we don't move forward as quickly as possible, we're just delaying harder solutions down the road. We think that the report highlights some significant and stunning data gaps that many state agencies are involved in and need to work on to close those gaps. We think that having stakeholders involved in the panel will be helpful in identifying some more of those data points that should be reported on. And then finally, streamlining the application process and the funding pots and the ways that local governments can access the funding available at the state level so that we can really make this a real pipeline. Right now, there are a lot of diverse pots out there, funding out there. It makes it hard for especially smaller agencies, some of the rural agencies, to really have the capacity to track those opportunities and are often left out. And that's what we've heard in a lot of the dialogues that we've hosted this year, really streamlining the application process and making a cleaner pipeline for funding to get to the local agencies so that they can put plans in place that help to achieve the goals and benefits of SB 375 that the COGs are outlining. Just a final point, SB 375 is really, it's a critical part of our overall strategy to meet our clean air and climate goals. It has to go hand in hand with VMT reduction, has to go hand in hand with electrification and sustainable freight if we're going to achieve clean and healthy air for all Californians and not leave anyone out. So as this group moves forward, I think that we do need to focus on public health and equity and really make sure that that's the focus as we move forward and that we do move forward as quickly as possible so we can all get some sleep. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Nancy Pfeffer?
Good afternoon. Thank you. Thank you very much, board members and commission members. I'm Nancy Pfeffer. I'm the executive director of the Gateway Cities Council of Governments. I think it's wonderful that these two bodies have begun meeting together, and I'm really grateful to the legislators who made it so. The Gateway Cities are 27 cities and additional unincorporated communities in Southeast LA County totaling 2.1 million people. Our members include cities as diverse as Long Beach, Vernon, Avalon, and Cerritos. 3/4 of our residents are in disadvantaged communities. I've asked staff to provide you 2 documents. One is a letter sent to all CARB members in June regarding how little cap-and-trade funding is reaching our communities. We have 5% of the state's population and have received 6% of the funding as of end 2016. According to state policy, we should be getting at least 10%, 25%, or more depending on the program. The key issue is limited capacity in our local governments, particularly when practically all the funding is competitive. Technical assistance is occasionally offered, but sometimes even that is competitive. The letter offers 2 related suggestions to address this problem. One is an ask that you consider a block grant program for a portion of the cap-and-trade funds rather than all competitive. The other suggestion, which could be funded via such block grants, would be to fund councils of governments to keep grant writers on staff. These shared resources could be deployed to help supplement the limited capacity within our cities. The other document is a brochure describing our COG's current long-range multimodal strategic transportation plan, or STP. As just one example of what has come out of this plan, we're developing a series of complete streets plans for our arterial corridors, of which we have 25 in our region. The first such plan identified about 15 to 20 projects in 5 cities that will reduce GHG emissions. However, implementation is now up to the cities and whatever resources they have. Our STP projects will create the change you're looking for under SB 375 if we address the capacity limitations at the local level. Lastly, I have one more issue. When the Metro Board approved the locally preferred alternative for the I-710 South corridor project this past March, a pair of motions directed the staff to collaborate on developing zero and near zero emissions vehicles. The conundrum in working with agencies such as Metro and Caltrans is that they build the infrastructure but don't determine the vehicles. This problem is by no means unique to the 710. To build the necessary partnership, we'd like to see Metro and AQMD formalize a long-standing countywide zero-emission truck collaborative by means of an MOU. I understand there is a draft of the MOU, and I've mentioned this to Board Member Mitchell. It's my hope that you will all support and, if need be, encourage the development of this MOU and the partnership itself. Thank you very much for your time and attention.
Thank you, Nancy. Okay, our next group of speakers, Ana Castro-Reyosa. Did I pronounce your name right or somewhere close, I hope?
You said Rosa, and I was like, I don't know who that is.
Oh, you know, I think I did. I was
Okay.
integrating Rosa Parks and jumping together and mixing and matching. Followed by Dwayne Parker and Carolina Martinez. So if we can queue up, and the microphone's yours.
So my name is Ana Castro-Reynoso with Environmental Health Coalition in San Diego. We are a grassroots environmental justice organization dedicated to achieving transportation justice through mass public transit and increased investments in environmental justice communities. First, we sincerely want to thank CARB staff for your bold leadership in crafting this report. We appreciate the extensive community outreach, especially in environmental justice communities, and clear inclusion of the community voice. The last time EHC provided comments on SB 375, we advocated for a 25% emission reduction target for Sandag. This report demonstrates that Sandag's target, and perhaps all targets, need to be revisited and increased. In San Diego and throughout the state, we are nowhere near our climate, equity, and transportation mode share targets. Environmental justice communities are still suffering. The findings in this report illustrate just a part of the impacts from our transportation system on EJ communities. Our communities are choking on dirty air, dying in pedestrian accidents, overburdened by housing costs, paying $20 every day for their families' transit passes, and on top of all of that, stuck on various buses for hours just to get to work. All of these numbers and data represent real people, many of whom do not have the ability or the privilege to be in this room. The solution is an equity-centered and solutions-oriented approach to mass public transit with substantial investments in EJ communities. To achieve this, CARB must first ensure that the map for healthy communities does not result in more bureaucracy that slows down immediate progress. While we support the recommendation for the map, CARB must ensure the committee is solution-oriented with clear timelines and accountability measures in place. This committee should also work quickly to enact policies that studies show increased transit ridership, such as reduced bus passes for low-income people and people on Medicare/Medi-Cal, as well as more ambitious policies like transit requirements per capita and per population. Second, CARB must create several seats for community voices from different perspectives on the Map for Healthy Communities Committee. The community perspective can no longer be endlessly relegated to testimony at workshops and hearings. Those most impacted must have a permanent and dynamic role at the planning table. Third, CARB must invest in community-level research on air quality, pedestrian infrastructure needs, and best practices. CARB can provide both technical support and funding and include those findings in the Map for Healthy Communities analysis, RTP evaluations, and future SB 150 reports. And fourth, it is more clear than ever that SB 375's current accountability structure simply does not work. We need to update and strengthen SB 375 to include higher emission reduction targets, greater transparency on RTP and SCS evaluation, and more than anything, a system to hold MPOs accountable to their targets. And after hearing the conversations that happened today, I really want to reiterate how incredibly important and fundamental this report is. What keeps environmental justice communities up at night is having to wake up at 3 a.m. just to get to work at 9. Environmental justice communities have been ready to take action for decades, and we need CARB and CTC to be just as ready to take that action. And in light of the findings of this report, there is absolutely no excuse not to. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Dwayne Baker?
Yes, thank you, and good afternoon. I'm Dwayne Baker, Deputy Executive Director of the San Bernardino County Transportation Authority and Council of Governments. In our roles, we have worked with the CTC and CARB on many fronts. We have worked hand in hand with SCAG, our 5 transit agencies in our local jurisdictions to reduce GHGs and VMT. We are investing over $600 million in capital improvements and high-capacity transit over the next 10 years. This includes incorporating the first zero-emission train set in North America in our Redlands Passenger Rail project, thanks to a grant from CalSTA. We are also engaged in a wide range of sustainability initiatives in the areas of air quality, health, habitat, and TOD planning. But while we are committed to policies and investments to further the goals of SB 375, we also understand the realities that we must operate within. Funding realities. When our half-cent sales tax was adopted in 2004, it was before SB 375. We made a promise to the voters of San Bernardino County. There was a list of projects that we committed to, and we are constrained by the ordinance that was adopted by the voters to those projects. We cannot fund beyond that. Goods movement realities. San Bernardino County has become a central part of an extended goods movement network by virtue of our geography. We are adjacent to the largest port complex in North America and on the Pacific Rim. We have to deal with the impacts from that, and we work through that with the rail corridors, e-commerce, the changing nature, and it is paramount for the private sector in that to succeed if they are to have the funds available to them to invest in the clean technologies that we need to meet the goals of SB 375. And finally, the market realities. Before changes in transportation investments are mandated, it is important we understand the market response and how people are making their choices and their decisions. One size does not fit all. We must tailor strategies to the unique conditions in the different regions of the state. Conditions have changed since SB 375 was passed. We have had the recession and the recovery. We have experienced years of economic growth since the depths of the recession, and it should not be a surprise that VMT per capita has increased. Housing affordability has reached crisis levels, and people are driving until they can qualify. This is illustrated by the fact that 79,000 more people commute from San Bernardino County into Los Angeles County than the other way around. The median price for a house in San Bernardino County is $316,000. The median price for a home in Los Angeles County is $620,000. In Orange County, it's $790,000. We look forward to work with the CTC and the Air Resources Board and other partners, but we hope that transportation, environmental, economic, and housing policies are aligned and not at cross purposes. Finally, it is our hope that any policies or strategies that might be considered to address these issues start from an understanding that different strategies are needed in different regions of our state. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, we have Carolina Martinez. Is Carolina here? Did she have to leave? I'll set that one aside. How about Jack Shu? Kendall from the LA Chamber in the queue line next, if I can get Kendall down there.
Hello. Good afternoon, commissioners, board members. My name is Jack Shu with the Cleveland National Forest Foundation. Well, we failed. I'm going to say it. This report from CARB for 350 shows that we failed. And I could have told you this 10 years ago, because I was involved with a legal lawsuit against Sandag, together with the Attorney General, saying that even though a document, a EIR, that you spend millions of dollars worth, that can stack several inches high on a desk, can be flawed. And it was flawed. In fact, it was the first EIR from a major NPO that had to be decertified, even though it went all the way to the Supreme Court. So, we know we're failing. And there's one thing that I learned from that case, or several things. One is that we need to deal with some truths. We need to deal with the truth that drivers are on welfare. Yes, drivers are the ones that get more subsidy than everyone else, but we don't talk about it, even when we campaign against Proposition 6. So we need to change that idea, that drivers are not paying their own way, and they probably should start. They should at least pay for the roadways, the maintenance, the law enforcement, and everything else it takes to keep people driving. And maybe they should be paying for the sickness and illness and the greenhouse gas emissions they produce as well. And I can guarantee you that if that happened, we would have less driving and VMT would go down and we'd have to start fixing things. So why not think of other ways to raise money that gives the driver the real cost? And I know you're going to say political reality. Well, Judge Taylor, who presided over our case at the Supreme Court, or the Superior Court, said, when it comes to planning, when it comes to figuring things out to give to the public, it's only for EIR. Political realities do not matter. It's our job to tell the truth and give people information. And as leaders, as governing boards and bodies, we should be telling the truth. We should be telling the truth of what the cost of transportation really is and who bears it. We do not have a fair system now. It does not make sense to give someone who buys a Tesla a rebate. Certainly it doesn't make sense for someone who is taking transit, walking and biking to have to pay for more freeways. And that's the kind of system we have now. And we need to rectify that, and I think that's the way we need to go to change things. We need to deal with some outcome realities. When we talk about equity, let's really deal with that term correctly. Equity does not mean equal or balance. Equity means rectifying things. With the amount of cancer patients from kids, health defects from driving in our urban areas, in our communities of color, is the same as those in suburbia, then we have equity. And when we don't have that, don't tell me about balancing things. Let's make things right first. Let's deal with funding flexibility. It does not make sense to me why we're building more freeways when we know we need to reduce VMT. We need to fix that. There are federal funds, state funds. Let's fix that, and we have the ability to fix that. Let's shift that over so we have alternatives. There are some good things, and I see some great things in this report on 350. Finally, we're equating housing issues with transportation issues. And don't tell me the MPOs can't deal with land use. We could incentivize land use policies through transportation plans and transportation funding. You can influence land use greatly. Let's look at the cost of housing and transportation together as a percentage of family income and start working towards reducing those numbers. That's a way to really look at the whole picture and helping the whole families. And let's finally look at urban growth boundaries. That's another way to approach land use, and our transportation plans can work towards that end as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Kendall, followed by Bryn, followed by Jonathan Matz. And because our meeting was advertised till 3:30 and I'm just about officially to go over, I'm going to ask everybody to be as brief as possible and feel free to give us your written comments. We'd love to hear from everybody, and I do want to give everybody a chance to speak, but quickly, please. Thank you.
Of course. Good afternoon, commissioners and board members. My name is Kendall Ascension, and I'm here on behalf of the Los Angeles Area Chamber of Commerce, which represents over 1,600 organizations and 650,000 employees in the region. Thank you for allowing us the opportunity to provide comment on today's report and the impact of critical issues like the links between transportation, economic opportunity, housing, and our state's climate goals. In the past decade, California has made significant strides in reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. We recognize that we must continue to work together to reduce emissions. However, we do have some concerns. AB 32 dictates that statewide emission reductions should minimize cost and maximize the benefits for our economy. And SB 375 maintains that feasibility is part of the equation to achieve greenhouse gas emission reduction targets from the transportation sector. Both AB 632 and SB 375 rightfully acknowledge the state must consider the economic impacts of planning activities when determining emission targets. We are concerned that rules and regulations to reduce emission reductions are taking precedence over economic growth, which would drive businesses and jobs out of the state. As I was listening to today's discussion, there were a number of comments that maintained that maintaining a thriving economy is equally important as reaching our emission reduction goals. And all of the COGs who've been coordinating with local communities have continued to emphasize that residents see transportation and housing as key drivers to economic success. The Chamber urges CARB to balance emission reductions with ensuring that Californians live in and benefit from a strong and growing economy, and appreciate the spirit of collaboration with this joint meeting. We invite the opportunity to collaborate on policies to provide insights on the impacts of proposed rules, regulations, and incentives on the business community and economic opportunity in the LA region. Thank you.
Thank you, Kendall. Bryn?
Thanks. Good afternoon. I'm Bryn Lindblad with Climate Resolve. We're a local organization focused on advancing solutions to climate challenge that also help communities thrive. I want to start by commending CARB staff for really putting in the dedication and the tough work that's needed to help us figure out how we can meet our climate targets and in a way that really advances equity and health. It was some hard work, all the analysis that was presented to you today, to identify those opportunity areas, and I think it deserves a big appreciation. I think what it doesn't warrant is some threats to rescind authority or reactions from board leadership to apply the brake pads. I think it really warrants our thanks and our support. It's a call to action. Now today's agenda was completely made up of informational items. This past June at your first joint meeting, there was a number of us that called for a work group to convene in between these joint meetings and really put in the work to make progress on rising to the challenges that we're dealing with. And so I'm hoping that we're not going to keep coming to these meetings and kind of throwing up our hands, overwhelmed by these challenges, but that we really put in the work to advance the solutions that are needed. So I think it's time to roll up our sleeves and figure out how we advance actions that would really make the difference in improving accessibility via non-single occupancy vehicle modes. So we've submitted to you in your packet and also to the governor-elect a transportation platform that contains a number of actions that community groups statewide put forth as what's needed to really improve accessibility in a sustainable and equitable way. And I'll clue you in, public transit is a big part of that picture. So we hope it can be a useful resource to the MAP task force and really strongly support that idea to convene such an outcome-oriented task force and do it in the very near future. Would like to see a draft map by the October joint meeting and would encourage that MAP task force to include public membership. Think that sort of robust engagement is what will lead to more actionable solutions. I think there's a real need here for state leadership to form a conducive policy framework that will help us realize better mobility options. Lastly, I want to thank Chair Inman for suggesting the need to really dig into the challenges that were raised in the SB 150 report today. To me, that sounds a lot like a work group, and I hope at the next joint meeting that we can be thanking the leadership here for making that happen. What keeps me up at night is my impatience with the institutional inertia that's really preventing us from making progress. And I'd urge you all to use your power to add urgency to the call to action that's been presented to you today. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next we have Jonathan, and I hate to keep harping on this, but we're really running over in that.
I'll read
give me your
again.
best speed discussion.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, commissioners and board members. Thanks for the opportunity to address your meeting this afternoon. My name is Jonathan Matz. I'm California's Senior Policy Manager for the Safe Routes to School National Partnership. I wanted to echo Bryn's thanks to the very impressive and thorough work of CARB staff in this report. It's fascinating reading, and it's dire reading. It makes strikingly clear that drastically reducing how much we drive and not merely swapping out the fleet of what we're driving is our only hope of averting climate disaster in this state. Converting short auto trips to other modes, especially on foot or two wheels, also transit. It's one of the most effective ways of reducing VMT and has the additional benefit of improving health outcomes in our communities. The Joint Mobility Action Plan that she mentioned, proposed in this report, holds great promise for identifying a way out of this crisis, but we must ensure that any such plan is centered on achieving equity and meeting the needs of underserved communities who have too long been prevented from expressing their needs, much less receiving the necessary support to address those needs. It also needs to be directly implementable with strong built-in accountability measures at every level. Finally, this report, as Brent said, is a call to action. And its diagnosis of the problem facing us, its prescription for getting out of there. These may sound like unwelcome doses of medicine, but no one, as far as I can tell, is disputing how we're going to feel as a state if we don't take this medicine, or if we simply decide that we can cure the illnesses that we know we're facing by doing exactly what we've been doing for decades up until now. So like Bryn, I hope we'll be celebrating with you a year from now the results of the map, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to work on my line here. So Cody Rosenfield up next, followed by Richard Lyon, Keith Dunn, and then Richard Lambros. Please, if you can queue up.
Thank you, board members and commissioners. I'm Cody Rosenfield from the Coalition for Clean Air. I'd also quickly like to thank staff for coordinating these meetings. It's really important that two of our most important actors cooperate. How transit dollars are spent has direct impact on the air quality in our state. Adding more highway capacity is no longer a feasible strategy if California is to meet its clean air and climate requirements. As I'm sure you all know, the South Coast is very out of attainment with the Clean Air Act requirements. The Transportation Commission really has to cooperate with CARB to strategize spending toward attainment of those standards. In many cases, spending doesn't benefit people who actually live near the projects. An important example would be the 710 freeway, the southern portion, where lane additions were the initial proposal. That would have added more trucks to the freight corridor and spending billions of dollars only to add pollution. Thankfully, the lane additions were delayed, but it's not enough. Clean truck lanes and vehicle charging should be a part of any project that size. The air districts and the Air Resources Board will provide incentives for vehicles, but the Transportation Commission must create the infrastructure to make those regulations succeed. As others have said, creating a mobility action plan is a great opportunity to continue this conversation. Prioritizing community input will be really important in that process. Thank you all.
Thank you. Richard Lyon.
Good afternoon. Richard Lyon here on behalf of the California Home Builders, the California Building Industry Association. We have a letter on file, so that is a detailed letter. I won't spend a lot of time going over that. Just to make a couple points. Our view of SB 375, because we were at the table, we were part of the coalition of the willing, is that the greatest strength of it is that it's implementation by consensus and a sense of spirit of cooperation. It was understood by all when we negotiated SB 375 that land use decisions, housing approvals, land patterns, transportation strategies, programming, financing, and project delivery take time. They take patience and they take time. They don't turn on a dime. And in this regard, SB 375 is a bit of an anomaly in terms of our overall state programs. AB 32 and SB 32 had a premium on getting short-term results. That's not the case with SB 375. We all understand that it takes time in order for these types of activities to be able to mature and provide results. Is VMT increasing? It definitely is. VMT is an activity that facilitates social and economic interactions. VMT is not just a dead weight on the economy, but there's some good to it as well. In fact, there's quite a bit of good to it. Is transit ridership on the decline? Yes, it is, and we've heard a lot of reasons why. But is SB 375 producing important groundwork in regions throughout the state that can provide sustainable and long-term payoffs? We really do believe that it is. So we don't subscribe to the notion that SB 375 is underproducing or that it's failing. A couple words on the policy recommendations in the report. There's recommendations that we might want to add more targets to the SCS. We think that that would be the wrong direction to go in. Loading up the SCS with additional prescriptions and subjecting future transportation and housing projects to the force multiplying effects of additional regulatory scrutiny, to cost, to price rises, and to litigation would do, we think, very little to advance the notions of environmental integrity, but it would definitely provide scarcity in terms of transportation projects and housing. Fundamentally, we need to look at barrier removal, and this has been something that's been talked about. We need to build more housing in California. The market is going to deliver California from the housing crisis, and that's the privately financed, private market. It's going to be the catalyst to provide the housing. Many of those market rate projects have affordable components to it. So this is kind of a twofer in terms of housing. The market needs to lead the recovery. We also need to streamline the approval process. We have CEQA reforms that are there for a very small portion of an overall SCS. We need to advance that significantly. If the SCS identifies the preferred growth pattern in a region, then we need to apply the kind of reforms throughout the region, not just within very small and micro areas. Thirdly, we need to look at tax increment financing. We've been working with a number of experts. We have education at the table. We believe that it's important that we bring that back, that economic growth, housing benefits public treasuries from the state to the region to the local. And it is incumbent on those public entities to recognize that and reinvest back in communities to achieve and help to achieve our housing crisis, but also to achieve the environmental goals as well. So it's important that we take a fresh look at tax increment financing. Pricing strategies are important. And then finally, it's important that the public understand the connection between these environmental policies and the everyday cost of living in California. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Keith Dunn.
Thank you, Keith Dunn. And here, I'm the Executive Director of the Self-Help Counties Coalition. A lot of people today like to talk about the self-help counties and the investments that we make here in the state of California. I guess I would just like to remind folks of the collaborative nature in which those expenditure plans are developed, the fact that they don't stop at county lines. These are really regional plans that go into our neighbors and talk about how to best plan and pay for those regions. I want to address specifically pages 59 and 60 in this AB 150 report, where it talks about opening up those expenditure plans and widening them out. We have a saying at Self-Help Counties, it's promises made, promises kept. It's really the mantra of our success, in that we interact with our voters and on a 2/3 basis go out and earn their trust and deliver those projects. So I just would like to keep in mind that the hard work that these self-help counties have done with political courage, sometimes 3 times to get that voters' approval, let's not mess with that. It's a sacred trust. It's developed collaboratively with citizen input and oversight, and it's really a model that should be implemented with the state. And pages 59 and 60 in the AB 150 report, I just wanted to answer that specifically. Thank you.
Thank you, Keith. Okay, Richard Lambros, followed by Ella Wise, Stacy Dabbs, and Esther Rivera. If you will, please line up. Well, I'm trying to get this as fast as I can. Okay.
I'll second that.
I was trying to. Well, we have a little later train, so we're covered. We can take the 5 o'clock, but anyway, yes, please go, and please, everybody, be brief. And
good afternoon. I'm Richard Lambros, Managing Director of the Southern California Leadership Council. I have thrown out my prepared text, and I will just make a few observations. First of all, the Leadership Council is a nonpartisan organization led by former governors Gray Davis and Pete Wilson, and includes 36 presidents and CEOs of major industries and organizations in Southern California. We're focused on job creation, economic development, and the quality of life in our region. We've been involved deeply with SB 375 since its inception and throughout its implementation. We obviously read with great interest the SB 150 report. We particularly appreciate the comments you all have made today. It makes it easier for me to throw out as I said, my prepared comments and just make a few observations. Particularly appreciate Assemblyman Frazier's outlining of the legislative intent of the 150 report. Let's just focus on one thing if we can. I'm so glad you heard from the MPOs. You've heard the great things that are being done, because there is a lot of great work being done under SB 375. But let's focus on the finding and the main focus of the report, the shortcoming in achieving targets. And I want to take you back 10 years ago just for a quick story, which if you recall, and many of you on this panel and many in the audience were involved in the original target setting, CARB made its mantra for target setting that the targets be ambitious but achievable. Ambitious but achievable. And that was throughout the goal. And they set out targets to each MPO, and in fact, some of you on the panel remember when it got to SCAG said no, those targets are in fact too ambitious, and they said no to accepting the targets, and they asked specifically, they said we will accept them if we can have some assurances, and they asked for a meeting with CARB on funding. And during those discussions, the main focus was redevelopment, the dollars that were needed, the tools that were needed, and other funding sources, because it was clear even then that any planning around what we're trying to do under SB 375 is not achievable if it is not properly resourced. And from the private sector, you know that. You never take on a project if you don't resource it. We took on SB 375. We undertook tremendous planning, and it has been tremendously successful. Pause and take a look at where our trajectory would be on these issues. What would housing look like? What would transportation look like without the SB 375 process? We've changed our trajectory, much to the better. But we didn't resource the process. So our group would argue with several of our partners from the private sector that as you look at SB 375, and it is healthy to look at it 10 years in, just ask two things. One, let's look at the targets themselves. Are they achievable? And let's go back to how we're doing our target setting. We can't put more on these organizations than is in fact achievable. And two, as have already been covered, we have to have the tools, redevelopment and other dollars and resources necessary to get the job done. Thank you.
Thank you. I now have a bell ringer, so. Ella.
Hi, my name is Ella Wise, and I'm the State Policy Associate of Climate Plan, a network of more than 50 organizations statewide working on building healthier, more equitable, and sustainable communities. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'll keep it short. I wanted to echo everyone and thank ARB staff for their hard work. The report is a huge step towards climate accountability and provides strong foundation for meaningful action. We are not meeting our goals. There's been a lot talked about today, but that's the takeaway. Regions are not meeting the targets that ARB expects them to meet and counts on them to meet. So this means a lot of things. It means that Californians are stuck in traffic. It means that we're not providing the options for them to be able to opt out of congestion. But it also means, according to the report, that the state will not meet its 2030 goals unless things change. So what do? Like many others here, we support ARB staff's recommendation for a mobility action plan for healthy communities. It should focus on equity and transportation justice, and it should be formed with great urgency. We've provided 2 letters. One of them specifies who should potentially lead the map process, as well as a timeline, and we'd like to see a draft outline of the map by October's joint meeting. But the Mobility Action Plan, or the MAP, includes housing and legislation and a lot of actors, right? So what can ARB and CTC do together to make these meetings meaningful and actionable? So not only can you support the Mobility Action Plan, but you can focus on funding. That's the power in this room, right? Is power over the funding. So focus on the funding and start today. The LA Times editorial board wrote an editorial on Wednesday that I quote, "Nor have state officials done enough to align transportation spending with climate goals. Let's change that. You have the power to change that." Mr. Akrata earlier said that'd be the most important thing for the state to do. Thanks very much for the time and your action on this important report.
Thank you. Stacy Dabbs. Followed by Esther Rivera Maricela from the Port and Erica Rincon from Policy Link.
Thank you very much. I'll be brief, Madam Chair, if you'll excuse me for the informality in my comments then. I am the Executive Director. My name is Stacey Dabbs, Executive Director of Merced County Association of Governments. I'm also the Executive Director for 2 public transit agencies, our countywide consolidated public transit system in Merced County, and also a 5-county system that provides public transit to Yosemite National Park. I was disappointed. I think I missed Assemblyman Frazier by about 20 seconds. I just wanted to say I completely appreciate everything that he said, literally every word that came out of his mouth today. I want to say thank you, and also to reiterate or to strengthen the comments that were made by Keith Dunn, and the remainder of my comments that I prepared for today I can submit in writing.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Okay, Esther.
Hi, good afternoon. First, I just want to thank all of you commissioners and board members for your time today, and also thank CTC staff and ARB staff. I know how much goes into these meetings, and we definitely appreciate all the time and effort. I want to echo a lot of what's been said by my colleagues, but to save time, I'll just say ditto Ella, ditto Bryn. and call out some very specific comments. So I want to highlight the fact that we are very much in support and appreciate the effort that went into the SB 150 report. And I want to highlight a comment that Commissioner Van Konynenberg made, which was that there needs to be more collaboration between the two groups, not just in the SB 150 report, but I think, and I'll push to say this is my comment, that it should go further. This interagency work group that we've been proposing since the last meeting is a way to get that collaboration moving and a way to see more action made between meetings. And I think that that's really key. So we definitely support the map as well as this interagency group that can continue working on some of these items that come up in a more actionable way. But we need to do that now. We need to see this group formed. We need to see action. We need to see it in April. We need to see something else in October. But it's very important that we see that. And I think collaboration is key. And I appreciate all your time. And I'll just keep it brief. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Maricela.
Good afternoon. My name is Maricela Caraballo de Ruggiero, and I'm with the Port of Los Angeles. On behalf of the Port of LA, thank you for holding this important joint board meeting in our region. The Port of LA is the largest container port in the Western Hemisphere, handling 9.3 million TEUs. There is no doubt that every day is freight day. The Port of LA is also a world leader. The Port of LA is also a world leader in maritime environmental programs and leading the industry to green all of our operations. The Clean Air Action Plan implemented by the ports of LA and Long Beach is breaking records. This was also a joint effort with CARB, US EPA, and South Coast AQMD. In a 10-year period, we have reduced emissions for all our source categories: trucks, ocean-going vessels, trains, cargo handling equipment, harbor craft like tugboats. Overall, we have reduced diesel particulate matter by 87%, nitrogen oxides by 60%, sulfur oxides by 98%, overall greenhouse gases by 13%, all the while we have increased our throughput, our container throughput by 10%. We have been able to do this because we're working with our industry partners and our tenants. We have reached these goals on a voluntary process without regulation, and we are not done. We are working on our CAP, the new Clean Air Action Plan 3.0, looking at new goals for the next 5 years, challenging the industry to change over their fleets and equipment, new equipment that has not quite been developed, but some are in the testing phases, working with the technology advancement programs and pilots to get there. The Ecofratis project is just one example that demonstrates technology with drayage trucks to improve drayage operations to and from the ports of LA. The port wants to thank CARB staff for working with us and our staff throughout the years. This has enabled the ports to surpass our goals. We also look forward to our continued working relationship with CARB staff so we can hit the next generation of our targets. Continue to work on timelines to reach our targets. This is so important for our maritime industry. The port has a proven track record of working with our maritime industry partners to get there without regulations. Help us, work with us to achieve these goals that we ultimately all want to achieve. And I just want to thank the CTC staff for supporting our last two projects, and we look forward to our continued relationship. Thank you.
Thank you. Erica? Then I want to have Kurt, OCTA.
Erica Rincon, oh, sorry.
Okay.
Erica Rincon on behalf of PolicyLink. We're a national racial justice advocacy organization. I also want to express our real deep appreciation for the staff's leadership for putting forth the SB 150 report. We especially appreciate how prominent equity was lifted up in that report, and that it recognizes the large inequities in transportation, housing, and air quality that continue to affect low-income people and people of color in California, a population that comprises a large segment and really requires us to focus on their needs if we are serious about building a stronger economy in this state. We support a number of strategies and echo previous comments made by Climate Plan, Climate Resolve, and California Walks. I did want to mention that with regard to the Mobility Action Plan, that is something that we support, and we encourage that plan to be focused on climate and mobility justice and to ensure that there's also public membership within that Mobility Action Plan, including community-based organizations that serve low-income people, people of color. I also wanted to make or mention the transportation platform that Bryn also talked about earlier, that there are several actions in there that are especially focused on how we align our money with climate and equity goals. That is also called out in the SB 150 report, including leveraging the large amount of money and transportation for high quality jobs and careers, specifically for people with barriers to employment through workforce partnerships with community-based organizations and targeted hire policies. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Kurt?
Good afternoon, Kurt Brodke with the Orange County Transportation Authority. Thank you. I'm speaking to you as a transportation planning agency. We're also a builder of arterial, freeway, and transit projects, and we also have to operate and maintain whatever we put out. So that's essentially our role. Recently, our board approved our long-range transportation plan, which is our submittal for the SCAG Regional Transportation Plan. That's a $40+ billion plan, and much of the funding for that comes through our self-help measure, also known as Measure M. One of the projects that's in that plan is the Orange County Streetcar Project. That particular project just broke ground last Friday. And so thank you to the Commission, to CalSTA, as well as ARB for the $25 million in funding that contributed to that $400 million project. We're very grateful. I did want to point out on that project that from concept to groundbreaking, that was 10 years. And it takes a long time to do big transportation projects. And I think that's something to keep in mind as you're talking about major changes in policy. We're just not there yet. We're still planning and building projects. So keep that in mind as you consider policy changes in the future. In terms of operating our projects as well, that's a continual issue for us as well. We don't really have the flexibility in terms of the state funding sources for long-term operations. And that's something that should be on the table for further discussion as well. In addition to that, predicting how we can use those funds in the future for our regional transportation plan and the projects we submit is very difficult when some of the funding programs change or are not available. So flexibility and predictability are very important as we move forward. As it relates to the SB 150 report, I also want to underscore the points made by Keith Dunn as it relates to our own self-help measure known as Measure M, as well as some of the other issues in the report that have been noted. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry for that obnoxious alarm clock. I do hate alarm clocks, but it's necessary right now. I appreciate it. Mike Lewis? Is Mike still here? Not seeing Mike. Andrew Henderson? Okay, I picked up. Oh, okay, Andy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be very brief. I think it was about 3 years ago I last addressed the CTC, and I don't know what the exact agenda item was, but we talked about the fact that the legislative imperative and the regulatory imperative has to be GHG reduction, not VMT reduction. And I thought there was a good discussion about that, and I thought there was a lot of understanding of that fact in front of that commission. The last time I addressed the Air Resources Board was September of 2010, when I testified against the targets that they set, the targets we're now talking about. And our position was similar to what somewhat similar to the fellow from San Diego who said he could have told you 10 years ago these targets wouldn't have been met. We felt the same way, but for a different reason. And that is that they were unrealistic when they were set. In fact, just 18 months earlier, the AB 32 scoping report asked for 5 million metric tons from the business as usual projection for this segment, which is light transportation and land use. And then just less than 2 years later, they set the targets, and that 5 million metric tons was increased to about 21 million metric tons. A huge difference. And we were saying, how are you going to get there? How are you going to get an 8% decrease in what is really per capita VMT, not per capita GHG, because the way CARB has set it up is everything related to what comes out of the tailpipe, they take credit for elsewhere. So a mile driven is going to be assessed at a static rate of GHG emissions. So they basically said, the question is, how could you get an 8% reduction in VMT, effectively, per capita VMT, in the SCAG region when you're talking about a 15-year period in which the housing stock would only grow about 4%. So our point was, the subtitle of last week's report should be, reality is simply not cooperating. And I think they need to look at the targets much more than they need to look at trying to bend reality to meet these targets.
Thank you. Okay, next we have Wes Ruderman from Active SGV. Is Wes still here? Followed by Carissa Willett, Building Industry of Southern California. Followed by Rio Oxis, People for Mobility Justice. If you could queue up, please. Yes.
Good afternoon, board members. Wes Ruderman with Active SGV. This is our first time at CARB or CTC, so pleasure to be here. I wanted to quickly answer the question that was posed earlier, and what keeps our organization up at night. And I think a couple of things sprang to mind. Number one is unsafe streets. The number one cause of childhood mortality in LA County is traffic collisions still. And predominantly older adults and young people are victims. Declining air quality. We had 87 days of poor air this summer. So it's one, in the past 2 decades, it's been the worst streak we've had, and that has a disproportionate effect on young people and especially the inland valleys which we represent. Unaffordable housing is another thing that keeps me up at night. We have a lot of people getting displaced and pushed out. And then I think more than anything else sitting in this meeting today is it feels like there's a lack of a sense of urgency based on all these really serious challenges that we're facing and that were outlined in the report among the decision makers, among you who actually have some power to do something. And we recognize that land use is difficult. You cannot totally control the land use issues, but there are a lot of other things you can do. And I'm going to just touch base on a couple of the ones that we've noticed. In our region, so we work in an area of LA County that has about 2 million residents, about 30 cities. It's very car-centric. The center of it, top 10% most pollution burdened in the state, according to CalEnviroscreen. Almost no active transportation infrastructure. Transit is kind of piecemeal. But there's a lot of interest in changing our communities and helping people get around. Cities keep applying for ATP. They don't get it. It's very difficult for small communities, especially disadvantaged communities, to get it and administer it. We have a very large student population. Our Assembly member, Chris Holden, has applied or has gotten legislation passed through the state multiple times to do a universal student transit pass program, help increase transit use, especially amongst people who are open to it. It hasn't been funded multiple times. CARB and CTC also really focus on EVs, but you're always focusing on cars. And a lot of lower income people are open to using other types of smaller electrically powered vehicles like electric bikes and scooters, but those aren't eligible for rebates. So those are just a couple of the things. Last thing I would say, please get out of your bubbles. Talk to younger people. Talk to people who aren't homeowners, who don't drive everywhere all the time. Thank you.
Thank you. Carissa?
Good afternoon. My name is Carissa Willett, and I'm here today representing the Building Industry Association of Southern California. On behalf of our 1,100 members consisting of builders, developers, and trade companies within our 6-county region, we have been deeply involved in the SB 375 process since its inception. A decade has passed since the adoption of SB 375, and the primary finding set forward in this report is that California is not on track to meet the greenhouse gas reduction established under SB 375, despite the fact that California has achieved, ahead of schedule, its overall 2020 statewide climate goals established under AB 32. In our view, the primary reason that the targets established by CARB under SB 375 are not being approached with due speed is because they were uncritically established in the first place, in ways that conflict with how the California legislature intended it to operate. Specifically, CARB established that targets that assume that citizens would on average drive fewer miles in an ever-growing population and recovering economy. It is clear that the overly ambitious SB 375 targets constitute a slow motion attack on individual mobility as measured by per capita vehicle miles traveled. The assumption about VMT reductions being achievable are being proven to be unrealistic and should be revisited. The SB 375 targets need to be moderated accordingly. State policy can be improved to make these targets more achievable.
And the changes needed include more effective CEQA streamlining to foster more rapid development of the type of housing and other land uses needed to achieve the GHG emission reductions, the restoration of redevelopment incentives, and also steps taken to advance technological improvements, especially those in regards to fleet efficiency. We agree that the report's conclusion that an open and public review of SB 375 should take place, and we look forward to participating. Thank you.
Thank you. The dreaded bell. Rio?
Hi, I am not Rio. Rio had to leave a little early. They've ceded their time to me, so go ahead and just double the amount of time for this next speaker. I'm Jared Sanchez from the California
No, that
Bicycle
doesn't work.
Coalition.
So
It's not allowed here for that?
Okay,
Okay.
Jared, you can speak because you're on my list here, but yeah, the 2 minutes.
I'm next, yeah. That's why I was saying that. So I'm grateful you all were able to make it here for this important meeting. I really can't stress enough, as I did in June, about the importance of these meetings. It took legislative mandate to get here, coming from community-based organizations, environmental justice organizations, transportation justice organizations, simply because it was clear that you all weren't going to do it on your own. So we stepped in and helping facilitate this process to increase partnership, hopefully. So now the question for me is, and for a lot of speakers, is what do we do now? Now that this opportunity is before you, what can joint action look like? We all can grapple with the SB 150 findings, which I want to acknowledge staff behind me. It was a great report, of course, but it doesn't just end there with what's in the report. For me, it's about what low-income communities of color are saying now and what they've been saying for generations across our state about the vast mobility inequalities. Just because they are not here in this very exclusive space and just because they haven't submitted a report to you doesn't mean that you can avoid taking transformative steps to redress long-standing systemic inequalities built, maintained, and reproduced by transportation decision-making. I look forward to not just future meetings where this is a specific agenda item, but also where you all make coordinated and joint actions. And I know this isn't required by state law for you all to make these decisions through these meetings, but inaction can be just as disastrous. Board Member Sperling is right. You all need to act. However, how you act matters, and I hope you all actually embrace the abundance of community wisdom from marginalized and disenfranchised folks, folks of color, and let them guide you in your decision-making, or even better, let them decide themselves. And not just to rely on a lot of the paid regional and county transportation agency representatives, most of who are in this room, to monopolize all the expertise. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. John Barna, followed by Wes May, followed by Lindsay Nola. We're getting there, folks.
So you don't want the 15-minute version, huh? Real quickly, building on what the previous speaker said, I think there is an opportunity for the two agencies to work together. And if you're going to have an interagency working group, I would strongly urge that the two entities develop a new interagency public sector business model to focus on short-term objectives, not inconsistent with what Dan Sperling was saying. The two agencies need to figure out a way to come together and develop a joint mission for this purpose, because they are two entities that have fundamentally different legislative mandates. And so for this effort to succeed, I would strongly urge that there be a new thing that happens at the staff level and potentially at the board level to deal with these issues and to then interact with the appropriate stakeholders. We've heard a lot today. I would agree with everything about issues of scale, how to support local regional successes, how to support green mobility in the economy, and increase the housing stock that respects local land use and is more equitable. Focusing on creating short-term achievable objectives that fit within longer-range planning but demonstrates real progress that builds on itself is possible. And that's where that joint mission comes in. What's going to be required to make that happen, quite honestly, is the next administration and legislature have to fund it. They have to be able to support positions. They need to be able to say, we agree with this approach. If they do not, then these conversations will keep going on, and I don't know that necessarily we'll get to a certain place of action. Lastly, the concerns about current progress need to realize that what is being measured reflects daily incremental decisions that mobility customers make, incremental decisions made by business and industry, and incremental decisions made by local governments. I would suggest that a real measure of near-term success would be mobility customers, businesses,
Thank you.
and local governments having better choices to make. Thanks.
Thank you. Sorry to rush you. Wes May, followed by Lindsay.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Wes May with the ECA, Engineering Contractors Association. And our member companies, 200 member companies, do heavy underground installation of water and sewer lines in Southern California, sewage treatment plants, water treatment plants. We're contractors. And we joined in this letter from the Southern California Leadership Council, which I asked you to look at, that outlines some of our points of view with other construction industry associations and contractors. And the key point that we certainly agree with GHG goals and climate goals, but at the same time, we need economic viability. Our guys are out there right now working. Operating engineers, laborers, teamsters, carpenters, cement masons, the trades, bringing home the paycheck, which brings them good mental health, good physical health. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Okay, we have the final three, Lindsay, Sarah, and Shirley. If you'll line up, we'll love you. Okay, we're down to two. Sarah.
Good afternoon, almost evening. My name is Sarah Wiltfong, and I'm here on behalf of the Los Angeles County Business Federation, also known as BizFed. As requested, I'll keep my comments brief. Achieving emission reductions back to 1990 levels is a beneficial and ambitious goal, one that has led to cleaner air for our communities. While we believe achieving emission reduction is important, as has been stated already, we also must balance these goals with the job creation and the economy. After reviewing the progress report, we want to make it clear that we believe it's important that the focus remain on greenhouse gas emission reductions and not mandating vehicle miles traveled. That local land use decision making is respected, as they are the best decision makers who understand local needs, and that impacts on the economy are not secondary, but at the forefront of the discussion. We ask that when the California Air Resources Board considers how our state is going to meet its emissions targets, that it also balances the needs of California's economy. And we look forward to working with CARB to make sure that happens. Thank you for the consideration of our comments. Thank you.
Thank you for being brief. Shirley?
Good evening, Shirley Medina, Planning and Programming Director with the Riverside County Transportation Commission, and we are a self-help county, and I want to reiterate what Keith Dunn said about self-help counties. Our mantra is promises made, promises kept, and with that, I have nothing more to add. I think you have a big challenge ahead of you, and we are making progress. I think that's encouraging, and we look forward to working with you on meeting our goals to the best of our ability, withstanding all the other issues that are outside of our hands. With that, I'd like to welcome everyone to Riverside that are heading over there to spend some money. Thank you.
Oh, great. Okay, well, we're going to be on that train with you, hopefully. So anyway, do I have one? Okay. Do I have I don't have your card, or
I think I must have gotten lost in it. So, but sorry, I drove from Fresno this morning for 4 hours, so I was like, I'll be brief with my comment. Thank you. My name is Grecia Lanes. I'm with Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability, not to be considered confused with the other Leadership Council I was hearing previously. We are a local nonprofit based in the Central Valley and also the Eastern Coachella Valley, working with low-income, mostly rural, unincorporated communities. And I just, briefly want to just commend staff for the report, very thorough report. Although very sobering, I think it resonates a lot with what we see on the ground. We work with dozens of communities on these specific plans, and this is exactly what we hear from them. That they don't see the investments happening, and I think this is an opportunity we have right now to break down those silos and not just work within interagencies, but most importantly, work directly with community members who are, at the end of the day, the experts of what solutions will work in their communities and what won't. And if we realistically want to achieve
achieve our very aggressive climate goals, I think that's where it really starts right there, and especially looking at those rural communities, because at the end of the day, this is where our multi-billion-dollar ag sector is really based out of, and yet they are not receiving any of these benefits and are at the forefront of all of the burdens. So thank you.
Thank you. Could you see Doug and fill out the paper that we kind of need for our records? So anyway, I want to thank everybody who hung with us, and sorry that we had to get an alarm going, but I know it was necessary because I'd love to have everybody have a whole bunch of time. But in that, I'm going to recognize my fellow commissioners and board members. Anybody have some closing thoughts? Yes, Judy.
One thing that we've heard from a number of speakers is concern about the funding. And we recognize SB 375 drills all the way down to local government where the action really happens. And local government has expressed concerns about getting funding. And I've heard from them in various other arenas that they'd like to see some kind of local return or some kind of block grant funding for their projects. But that would be a matter of legislative action. The funding as it exists today comes by way of the statute. And so I think for those who are looking for that kind of change should turn to the legislature to ask for that. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody else? Yes, Dan.
So I'm going to make an offer with my other hat on, my university hat. so that not in terms of CARB, but at the University of California, we have 4 large institutes of transportation studies, and we have a number of researchers around the state. And we have started an initiative to look more closely to support the state at looking at advanced technologies, innovative mobility, new mobility for transportation. So we actually had a workshop last week. We had 70 researchers, professors show up, and we have a plan that we were going to do a series of roundtables or listening sessions around the state. So what I'd like to propose, and that would be in terms of looking at all of the different aspects, congestion, equity, as well as greenhouse gases. So what I'd like to suggest or offer is that we could do that in collaboration or in connection and somehow with CTC and CARB as part of a follow-up activity here. I can imagine there might, and so we'd work with the legislature, we'd work with the, Assemblymember Frazier and others to do that. And that could be one outcome of this process. And we would try to, and we could work with you to, any kind of concerns or products you might be interested in. And I would suggest also, the University of California is the research arm of the state. So let me also suggest that a possibility is we could run individual one-time workshops on different topics, like pricing, for instance, that relates to this. But the big offer, though, is a series of roundtable workshops around the state. We do one in the Central Valley, one in South, LA, Northern California. At least 3 is what we were thinking of. And we can coordinate with you whatever seems the appropriate way, however much credit or responsibility that might want.
Well, I think that's great. I think there's a lot of rich information that we received today. I think we all need to take that, and we also need to consider how that would work. And then I think we need to get the plan and the components going. And then if anybody got one thing from today, it's complicated. So I hope everybody appreciates that, and we're willing to work. So I want to say, on behalf of my fellow co-chair who had to step out, just thank everybody for your hard work, for our staff, for the folks that came and made the presentations, to the public that joined us, and to all of my fellow colleagues. I learned a lot today and appreciate it. And on your mark, get set, go, run for the train. Meeting's adjourned.